What is the creepiest thing that has ever actually happened to you? Story number 1. Years ago, I was on a cross-country trip, solo, to a family reunion. I was supposed to make it to a friend's house, but there was horrible weather and it was slow moving. Then a terrible accident happened just ahead of me, and I was stuck for quite a while. All told, I was 5 hours behind schedule. I was exhausted and in need of a bathroom and a shower, so I pulled into a little strip motel off a fairly backroad state road. It was obviously small and dirty, but would work in a pinch. There was a window to the outside where check-in was. The guy there eyed me up, then a college-aged girl asked me if I was traveling alone. I went to hand him my ID and credit card, but he insisted on cash only. Red flags were going off at this point, but I scrounged together just enough cash and he tossed me the key. The room was dirty, barely bigger than the bed. The first thing I did was go to the bathroom, then I flipped out the mattress. Dirty. Signs of bedbugs. A moment later, I saw a cockroach as well. That was it. I was out. I decided I would use the parking space at least and sleep in the back trunk hatch of my SUV. I curled up, using a suitcase for a pillow and random clothes for a blanket, and fell asleep for an hour. I woke up aware of someone talking on a phone outside. It was now around 3 a.m. He had finished up his call and walked quietly over to my room, unlocked the door and walked in. The lights didn't turn on, and a minute or two later he came back out, slamming the door behind him and cursing. With another guy. I hadn't seen Guy 2 enter, so I still don't know where he came from. They angrily talked for a moment, then the check-in guy walked over to my SUV. I covered up my head quickly with a shirt. After he tried to lock the door, he peered in the back seat. But between my tinted windows and blending into the general mess, he didn't notice me in the hatch. The two guys walked away to the far side of the lot, talking more. The one gesturing across the street where a diner was. While they were distracted, I climbed up to the front seat and started up my SUV. They turned around in surprise as I pulled away. I called my friends back home and told them, but didn't want to worry my family, so I said nothing to them. When I got back home some 3 weeks later, we figured out the name of the hotel thanks to Google Maps and called the local police. They told me the place had closed down only days before I called. Edit. Frequent question stuff. This was about a decade ago and took place along 250, I believe, in Virginia. The place name was Mountaintop or Mountainside Motel. It was a single-story building with a check-in window in the middle, tiny diner across the street, and no other businesses nearby. My logic was that it was smarter than parking by the side of the road. The police took my info and never called me back. Never found anything from my web searches immediately afterward. At least one friend thought I misunderstood the situation and there was a logical reason. Motherfucker. The stories that freak me out the most on these threads always include real people. Ghosts I can deal with. People are terrifying. Story 2. It was my senior year of high school. On a warm May evening, I was getting ready for bed when I heard yelling coming from outside. I ignored it until I finally crawled into bed. It wasn't long after I closed my eyes that I heard, "I wanna fuck you," through my open bedroom window. I was confused, so I got up and looked out my window. There was my neighbor standing at the fence that divided our yards, looking up at my open window. I was pretty freaked out, and I contemplated whether or not I should tell my parents. But it was dark and I didn't know whether or not my neighbor was yelling at me or at someone else that I couldn't see. I didn't know him very well. We had never spoken before. I didn't think there was any real reason to make a fuss over it. The next morning I was home alone, getting ready for school. I see my neighbor putzing around in his yard, and we make awkward eye contact through my living room window. I didn't think anything of it. Close to 8:30 that morning, I heard my dog in our backyard barking, and it started to sound vicious. As I'm in the bathroom, I can hear the back door open. I casually thought, it's just Mom. But in the back of my mind, I had a strange feeling it was my neighbor. My gut feeling was right. To this day, I am so thankful that I had listened to that small voice in the back of my head. We met up in the kitchen. There he was, standing 5 or 6 feet from me, with an 8-inch kitchen knife in his hand. I'll never forget the look on his face. He looked afraid, almost as if he didn't want to go through with what he was going to do. At the same time, he had this crazy look of lust in his eyes. He said, "Don't move." The only thought going through my head was, if you want to live, run, now. You know when you have those nightmares where someone is chasing after you, but your body just feels really heavy? That's how my body felt at exactly that moment. I wanted to faint, and I'm so glad that it didn't. As I ran out of the house, I remembered screaming, "No, no, no." I fell down the front stairs leading up to our porch, got up, and must have knocked on 2 or 3 different houses before someone finally answered their door. My town's entire police force showed up. The guy ended up going back to his house. I guess he was an unsuccessful recovering alcoholic and had drank 2 liters of vodka the night before. He admitted to the police that he had been watching me through my bedroom window for months. When the police searched his home, They found photos of me that he had taken that explained in explicit detail what he wanted to do to me. Holy shit. Story 3. I was just browsing this thread when I remembered the most creepy thing ever, with photographic proof. I was catching the last train back from London and had about an hour to kill at a station where I needed to change. It was late at night. I was on my own, and the station didn't have many people in it. I decided this was a great time to have a little wander around the platforms, stretch my legs a tad, and enjoy the wait. I ended up walking down a platform with no more scheduled journeys for the night, so naturally there were very few of us there. Actually, there were just 2 of us, me and a little girl. It's quite unusual to see a little girl standing on her own in the dead of night, and I'm not sure if I did the right thing or not, but I stopped walking, parked myself on a bench about 20 meters away. I decided to subtly keep an eye on her to make sure she was okay. At first, I assumed her mother had probably gone to the toilet or something and asked her to stand in the same place until her return, but children shouldn't be on their own like that. So I sat there and decided to be a temporary guardian for her. This girl was standing down the platform and appeared to be about 10 years old or so, in her school uniform. From what I could tell, she was Asian and seemed pretty confident standing where she was. Very, very still. Because after 5 minutes passed, this little girl was still standing in exactly the same position that she was in before. I mean, I hadn't seen her move an inch. I sat there on the bench, thinking about what could have happened. Had her mother told her to stand there and then abandon her? Had she been separated from her carer? Maybe I should wait a bit longer. And she just stood there, in the same position. Right arm clutched her body, staring directly at me. 10 minutes passed. 15. It was winter and the platforms were cold. This little girl must have been absolutely freezing, but she was just standing there, staring at me. I could feel her eyes burning into my soul. Was she angry? Was I hallucinating? I considered going to find out, but then a cleaner walked past her. He didn't even look at her. He just swept past and skipped on his merry way. He wouldn't just let a child stand there, right? Was she a ghost? If I got up to get help, then I would have to take my eyes off the girl. And then what if she ran away? What if some creep snatched her? No, her safety was important. 20 minutes. It was getting ridiculous. This poor little girl had been abandoned or something. I decided that when 25 minutes passed, if nothing had happened, I'd hop up and go ask her if she was okay. I don't know why I didn't do so sooner, but I was hoping her parents would come to collect her or something. As long as I kept a lookout for the girl, everything would be okay. 22 minutes passed. She was still standing there, staring at me from a distance. I needed to take a picture and send it to someone to make sure I wasn't seeing things, like a sleepy hallucination or a psychotic break or something, because this apparently invisible ghost demon child is just standing there casually glaring in my direction. I shit you not. Here's what came out of my phone's camera. I sent it to my boyfriend at the time for confirmation. No, I wasn't seeing things. I wasn't dreaming. I needed to go help her. And 25 minutes later, she was still standing there, dead still, staring at me in the freezing cold, in the dead of night. Just me and her, here on this dark and creepy platform. I stood up and tentatively walked towards her. I got a bit closer and she stood there, remaining still. Now as I got closer, it was probably the most, oh my god, moment I've ever experienced. I saw her face, the shadows hitting under the dim station lights. It looked half melted, like she had no real eyes. My heart was pumping faster and faster and faster. I couldn't stop now. This poor girl was probably a victim of a horrific accident, and definitely not a demon. Just because she stood so still for so long in the cold weather and stared at me. Well, I guess maybe she didn't stare at me. She didn't have eyes. Wait, if she's actually a ghost, is this my last moment on this planet? No, don't be stupid. She's just a poor little girl. I was scared, I admit, but I knew that this girl with a melted face needed someone's help. I needed to go ask her if she was okay. Besides, what kind of person would I be if I just left her there? And as I got closer, it just became more clear. She was deformed, abandoned, a poor little girl. But I couldn't help being scared, but I powered through. I walked up closer to her and opened my mouth to ask her something, trembling. I couldn't believe what I saw. She was made of Lego. She was a goddamn art installation made of Lego. Just standing there, being creepy, staring at people. And it is made of Lego. Dude, that looks creepy as hell even up close. Why the fuck would they put that there? Story 4. Went to a bar about 20 minutes from my apartment in Brooklyn. Because of construction, because I didn't know the way home, I'd lived there for about a month. It took some time to get home. When I got there, I noticed I had a Facebook message from someone I didn't know. Checked it and it was some guy saying, "Nice apartment. Can I come in?" I looked outside and there was some guy who had followed me home. I hadn't given my friends my new address yet, and he may have gotten my Facebook from a friend at the bar. I bolted the door and blocked him. The fact that he followed me and just randomly texted me rather than talk to me at the bar was unnerving. Story 5. Former Air Force here. I was a munition systems technician, and I worked in a very large storage facility called a bomb dump in Europe. This place had dozens of buildings, including many earth-covered magazines called igloos, housing thousands of bombs. This facility was pretty big. It was about 9 square miles, I think. An interesting thing about this bomb dump was that it was completely forested and populated with wildlife. Most are deforested because of the fire hazard, but the country that this bomb dump was in required that the area be maintained as a natural preserve. Now, despite having a small deer population, this forest wasn't nice and clear. Most forests have a fire or two to clear them out every 20 years or so. This forest had played host to munition storage since World War II, and had no fires since. It was thick, dark, and dank. The trees were so overgrown that you would be hard-pressed to see 10 yards in a straight line. Anyway, it was a pretty creepy place at night. Hell, it was pretty creepy in the daytime. Twice a day we had to run a security check to make sure that no holes had been cut through the fence, and that all the buildings were closed and locked. However, this wasn't the job of the swing shifters. We were a skeleton crew. The checks were run by the morning and afternoon crews, unless of course they fucked up, which they did one afternoon. The one guy in control doesn't realize that no PM security check was run until about 1 a.m. Since no one is working dispatch, he just walks down to the hall to our office and asks us to run it. We had finished all of our work early, so we were playing split-screen Halo, which was new at the time. Me and my friend Brian volunteered to take a truck out and run the check. We grabbed a walkie-talkie and a flashlight and headed out. First, we run the perimeter. It's about an 11 or 12 mile trip, but we have to go about 15 miles per hour tops, so it takes quite a while. When we started building checks, it was about 2 a.m. We began at the back. I can't remember how it went now, but we had an efficient system for checking every building without having to double back. Anyway, we started as far back from our building and coworkers as possible. Well, Brian decides that a piss and a cigarette are in order before we begin the building check, which would take us another hour or so. He shuts the truck off, drops the tailgate, and we just sit and chill in utter darkness while he burns down his cig. To this day, I don't know why he shut that ignition off. When we hopped back in and tried to start the truck again, nothing happened. The ignition simply didn't fire. No attempted turnover. No sputter and fail, just silence. It must have been an electrical problem. Well, fuck. We both thought about it and said it simultaneously. Control, this is Storage 1. We're broken down out here. Silence. Control, we're out past Building 70. We need a ride. You copy? Silence. We tried the walkie-talkie for a good 15 minutes before we realized that we would be walking back. Now, we could have stuck to the road. There were no streetlights, but at least we would know where we were going. We would have had to walk about a mile northward to the main corridor, then turn east for another 3 miles. Not too bad, but for some reason we thought it would be much faster to take a shortcut through the forest. I actually knew this was a shitty idea, but I had a man car to preserve, so I went along with the idea. No matter what logical idea I came up with for sticking to the road, it always sounded like I'm a giant pussy when I said it in my head. So I trudged out into the woods with Brian. You'd think that Brian had balls of steel. You'd think that he would shrug off any spooky shit just to save some face. This was all his testosterone-laden idea anyway, after all. Well, this wasn't so. Brian was scared shitless about 10 minutes in. Now, I wasn't too scared. I knew it was a bad idea, but I wasn't about to lose it or anything. However, Brian's anxiety was strong and I could sense it. And worst of all, it was getting increasingly contagious. Walking through thick woods is slow. Neither of us had watches on, and our cell phones were back in our lockers. Before, we just went off of the clock in the truck. But that truck was a quarter mile away now, so we had no real idea what time it was. But we were too far into the woods to go back. I knew that we weren't going in a straight line. We were meandering about. But I did know that we should have almost been to one of the rows of buildings. It was probably about 20 minutes since we had left the truck, but it might as well have been hours since we reached the row of buildings. These were old buildings, above-ground brick structures, not the concrete igloos. The above-ground magazines had specially designed roofs that would blow upward in the event of a catastrophic explosion, minimizing damage to nearby structures. There were also some of the oldest buildings in the bomb dump, a little newer than World War II itself. They were ramshacked, rusted, and coated in moss. Inside they were dank and moldy. The only thing we kept in them were plain Mk-82 bomb bodies, the least expensive and least sensitive stock that we had. The only saving grace about these buildings was the dim industrial lights over their doorways. While not ideal, the soft orange glow was a welcome break from our flashlight. We started walking down the gravel road that these buildings lined. We passed one, then another, and another. Then, holy fucking shit, Joe, one of the buildings was open. The big steel blast doors were sealed, but the side door for personnel to use was propped open with a fucking rock. Control, this is Storage 1. Building 62 is not secure. Silence. Did you get that, Control? Building 62 is open. Silence. I looked at Brian. You know we have to check this out, right? Though it was too dark to tell, I'm pretty sure Brian went a little pale. Yep. We approached the door like Osama bin Laden was going to jump out with a fucking scimitar and gut us. After all, we didn't have weapons on us. I stuck my head in. Hello? I felt a chill roll over me as I entered. Brian followed. It stunk in the building. It smelled like wet concrete and mildew. I shined the flashlight down a row of bombs. There were hundreds in there. When I was satisfied, we headed back to the doorway. We didn't have the keys to lock it up, but at least we could say that it was secure. That's when I heard it. The most blood-curdling scream I had ever heard. My heart went into my fucking throat. Brian just ran. I just followed him. We ran all the way out of the building, across the road, and into the trees across. What the fuck? Brian was shaking. I'm pretty sure that I was too. I'm not sure how I got out of breath. We only ran about 20 yards from the building, but it felt like I had just run a fucking marathon. I hunkered down, resting my palms on my knees. What the fuck was that? It sounded like a fucking banshee, man, Brian said. Then my heart sank. Oh, Jesus. We left the door open. Just fuck it. Dude, we can't. We already called it in. We'd be fucked. For the next minute, or 10, we just sat there panting, watching the door. Whatever was in there, it seemed to have no interest in following us out. Brian and I looked at each other and knew that we had to go shut the door. We both began walking up to it slowly. I was careful not to shine the flashlight into the door. I didn't want to get the attention of whatever was in there. We paused about 3 feet from the door. We'll just shut it, dude. And we did. I slid the rock away with my foot, and Brian gently closed the door. Not another noise came from Building 62. Control, Building 62 is now closed, but it's still unlocked. Copy that? Now you might be thinking, wow, that must have been pretty creepy. Nice one. But I'm not done. The night got even more fucked up. You'd think we'd stick to the road after the run-in with a fucking hell banshee scream, but things don't always pan out the way you want. We started up the gravel road towards the central corridor, passing more of the old brick magazines. We had about half a mile to go now, when there was another scream. We froze. It came from right up the road, just ahead of us. It came again. It was the most horrid, heart-rending sound I've ever witnessed in person. I shined my flashlight about, but there was nothing but pitch black and dense foliage. Hey man, if we go this way, the missile shop is pretty close. Brian pointed off into the forest. He was right too. The missile shop was a small office attached to a work bay, where missiles were pulled from storage and inspected. Of course, no one would be there to let us in, but there was a patio and it was well lit with flood lamps. I weighed the options in my head, cut another quarter-mile through the forest, which wasn't so bad the first time after all, and have a nice, well-lit place to relax until Control finally got our message, or we could keep walking towards the scream, and have another several miles of pitch-black road until we got back to the main office. Yeah, let's go, I said, feeling somewhat bold and chicken shit at the same time, and once again we were back trudging through the woods, the source of the screams getting further behind us. About 5 minutes into the brush, we realized this patch was much thicker than the first one. This shit was machete-worthy rotten underbrush. We were working our way through, starting to become quite anxious, when we came to a small opening, about shoulder width and clear of debris. It was a way through. Instinctively, we began following it. The path widened more and more until we were in a small clearing. I could now faintly see the floodlights through the heavy brush ahead. Look, there it is, I said, pointing. Speaking was the wrong thing to do. At this very moment, a set of eyes appeared about 20 feet in front of us. Big, giant yellow eyes gleaming in my flashlight. I sensed more movement around us. I twitched the flashlight to and fro. Eyes. Everywhere. Big fucking yellow eyes gleaming in my flashlight. We were literally surrounded. I couldn't breathe. Brian made no sound. We just froze in terror. We watched, utterly horrified, as a bunch of goddamn deer rose from their resting spots and passively trotted away. I gasped. Deer. It's just fucking deer. We both began howling with laughter. Moments later, we were through the brush, and Brian was smoking another cigarette in the missile shop patio. He looked at me and says, "Don't tell anyone, but I was scared fucking shitless back there." I was too, man. After some deliberation, we decided that the blood-curdling screams must have been some kind of bird. In hindsight, I'm almost positive it was a barn owl. The combination of trudging through pitch-black woods and hearing the screams had primed us for sheer terror by the time we stumbled on the herd of deer. Normally deer feed at night, but it was one of those especially dark moonless nights where even they decided it's too creepy to go out for a nibble. Once we had laughed off the fact that we were huge pussies, we walked the rest of the way back to our office. The one dude in control was playing Halo with the others. His walkie-talkie was down the hall in his office. Story 6. I went on a guided cemetery tour at night. About 6 or 7 of us were standing around a tomb, listening to the story of how the inhabitant had killed himself with a gun, when all of a sudden there was a big flash, and the whole sky lit up green with smaller flashes. We found out later that we had witnessed a meteor break up, so the tour guide takes a moment, recovers from the surprise, and continues his story about how some decades after the poor chap had killed himself, someone broke into his tomb and stole his skull. We then moved on and walked further into the cemetery when we were startled by a loud bang. We shrugged it off as a car backfiring, laughed nervously at how on edge we were, and continued the tour. Shortly after, we hear a couple more bangs in quick succession. And one of the tour party commented that they were pretty sure they were gunshots. There was another bang, closer. Definitely a gunshot. Then we saw a light in between some of the headstones, and I kid you not, we saw the figure of a man carrying a shotgun, slowly coming from the direction of the tomb we had just been at. We froze. I looked over to the tour guide, thinking it was some kind of prank he plays on all his customers, but he was completely white and was backing away. It was a man with a shotgun and he was walking towards us. He lifted a flashlight and pointed it directly at us. Several of us ducked behind the headstones as he yelled, "Get out of here! What the hell are you doing in this place?" Turns out the city council paid some guy to shoot possums in the cemetery and they forgot to warn the tour company. Story 7. On a spring break trip, a friend and I got dropped off at the front gate of our condo. The security guard saw us and kept insisting on walking us up to the room. We kept saying no and he seemed kind of weird. He followed us into the elevator and I stood as close as I could to the buttons. He kept making weird comments and telling us how hot we were. We kept bringing up how all of our boyfriends and our guy friends were in the room waiting on us, and how there were like 10 people staying there. When the elevator hit our floor, we took off running as fast as we could. 2 weeks later, after we came home, there was a news story about the same security guard. He followed a girl onto the elevator and made her perform sexual favors before he'd let her go. Edit. Found the article about it. He didn't rape her. It was almost 6 years ago. He locked 3 girls in the elevator with him and tried to touch their boobs and threatened to evict them. 2 were minors. He was arrested for false imprisonment. Story 8. When I used to go to college, I had to cut through a particular cemetery, the one attached to this church. The lack of space meant very few people had been buried there since the 1900s. Anyway, under this one tree was the grave of a very young girl, just on its own. Said her name and the date she died, 1885, age 12. I don't know why, but I always got a solemn feeling as I walked past that grave, every single day. Eventually it consumed me. I had no idea why I was getting that feeling walking past the grave, so I googled her name. Within about a week, I had found out who she was and why she was buried there. She was buried there after suffering from a lung complaint. According to the family Bible, she died most peaceably in her mother's arms. Shortly after she died, her family left Brighton and found a private school close to London. From what I can tell, the family never once returned to Brighton to visit her grave. I worked with a family biographer for a while, digging up as much as we could about this girl, because he had barely heard of her, save the death certificate and the mention in the family Bible. It is like they erased her from the last 50 years of their life. After a while, the trail went cold. I still had thoughts of how sad it was that this girl never had her family visit her after she died. And once again, those thoughts consumed me. I fell asleep one night and dreamt of her and her dad. She told me she was fine now. I never dreamt of her once after that point. The uneasy feeling went as I walked past her grave. A couple of months later, the guy I was working with emailed me a picture. He had found a photograph of her. The problem? It was death photography. Because that is what they did in the day and age, as it was too expensive to regularly hire a photographer. So the only existing picture of her is from the day she died. The kicker? The girl in that photograph looked exactly like the girl that I saw in my dream, the one that told me she was fine now. Up until I left England, I left flowers by her grave. This was the only grave in the whole cemetery which ever had flowers on it. My friends do it to this day, because nobody deserves to be forgotten, even in death. Story 9. I've been waiting a long time to tell Reddit the full story of the Whistler. This story requires many details, but it is unexplainable, creepy, and 100% true. I also have video evidence. When I was about 8 years old, I was taking my dog for a walk through the neighborhood with my mom. It was maybe 11 p.m. We lived next to a swamp or woods area on the edge of our neighborhood in Lansing, Michigan. I remember it being very silent and slightly windy. From down in the swamp, we heard somebody whistling at us. It sounded sort of like a bird, but each whistle was different enough that the lack of consistency made it human-like. The whistle sounded higher, then lower. I can't really describe it. My mom had a concerned, slightly terrified look on her face and grabbed my hand and said that we should go inside quickly. I didn't understand because I was too young, but seeing my mom freak out made me freak out too. After a while though, I kind of forgot about it. 2 years later, I was taking my dog out again, late at night. There's a large bush that could easily obscure a person behind it just next to the front door. As I was finishing the walk, the whistling noise started again. Same pitches, the same inconsistent, human-like tones. As soon as I heard it, a chill went down my spine as I remembered exactly the feeling of seeing my mom, terrified, looking down into the swamp at something I couldn't see. Maybe she couldn't either. I ran inside as fast as possible. Years went by and I thought about it less and less. I told only a handful of people and eventually it slipped from my mind. Fast forward to last summer. I'm 24, started dating my girl Sarah. We moved out to South Dakota for work. For Independence Day, we decided to go to Pier and watch the fireworks along the bank of the Missouri River. There was a free camping spot behind a hospital where you could pitch your tent, hang out, and see the fireworks up the river. We were near the end of the campground and there were very few people around us. As it was getting dark, the fireworks began. They were pretty far away, so the illumination they brought was very little. Thus, we had to sit right at the edge of the river to be able to see them. A huge thunderhead was moving in and a storm was imminent, so the air seemed electric and the wind was picking up. The atmosphere was eerie, to say the least. The police boats herded all the other boats off the river and left our area to do that elsewhere. Most of the other campers walked up to the river to have a better view of the fireworks, but Sarah and I stayed back and were drinking tall boys and kicking it. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a paddle methodically dipping into the water. We saw a figure, steering a canoe about 20 meters offshore. Sarah decided to go get more beers from the car, leaving me alone to stare at this mystery person. And then, of course, they whistled at me. My entire body was frozen and covered in goosebumps. It was the exact same whistler from my childhood, more than a decade earlier. I looked at the figure, but it was much too dark to discern who it could be. They were wearing a hat. When they were perpendicular to the shore from me, they stopped paddling, turned the canoe to face directly at me, and whistled right at me. I was so frightened I stood up and shouted at them, "Who are you?" They didn't say anything, just whistled a couple more times, turned the canoe 180 degrees, and paddled out of sight. I'm a videographer, so I already had my camera by my side and was taking video of the fireworks. As the canoe was almost out of sight, I grabbed my camera and got a shot of them whistling as they went away. When Sarah came back from getting beers, she was very confused as to why I was so freaked out. When I explained, she was freaked out a bit too. I was convinced we would both be murdered that night. How did this whistling person follow me after 14 years, all the way to South Dakota? Was it a coincidence? Why was it the same whistling noise? Who was that person and where did they go? So many questions still unanswered. To this day, I'm more afraid of being outside in the dark where I might hear that whistling again. I'm open to any explanations. If there is interest, I will find a plug and edit a little video of the fireworks and the whistling noise, and the canoe disappearing. I'm in Uganda currently and the internet is spotty where I am, so I'll do my best. Edit. Okay, finally. I spent all afternoon uploading this video. Here's the link. When I was still getting shots of the fireworks, I heard the whistling starts. I was too afraid at the moment to point the camera directly at the canoe, so I just turned my microphone towards it and kept a low-key shot facing downriver toward the fireworks. If you wear headphones, you can hear it better. It's the two-note whistle, high then low. You can hear me ask my girlfriend, "Are you whistling? Is that you?" She said no, but I wasn't sure, so I told her, "Stop it," because I was getting scared. The last shot, I boosted the brightness as much as I could and still make out the person in the canoe. It looks like they're wearing a red sweater or something. Edit 2. It's been a while, and I apologize for that. I'm back in the US now and I asked my mom about it. I sat her down and played the video for her. She honestly doesn't remember anything like that happening. I wish I had something more exciting to say. Alas, it must remain a mystery. Dude, I shit you not. In my country, there's a legend about a guy called El Silbón, the Whistler, a sort of damned soul that warns people of their coming death. Story 10. I work in a pub. It's about 2 miles away in the next village. I usually finish work late, 1 to 2 a.m., and have to cycle home. The only route is a small road that goes through somewhat large woods. There's a 1-mile stretch that has absolutely no streetlights. It's pitch black. As I was cycling through the woods, I start hearing the screeching sound, similar to a small animal dying. It scared the shit out of me, so I started pedaling fast. I continued to hear it, and it seemed as if it was progressing toward me. I used my phone's camera light to navigate, although it isn't impossible to see without it. I point my phone behind me and I swear I caught sight of some fucking humanoid creature on all fours running at me. Call it mind games, but this was pretty vivid. I continue to cycle as fast as I can. I've been cycling long distances from a young age. I'd like to say I'm quite fast. Yet I continue to hear the screeching and the light padding of the footsteps of whatever is chasing me. I try to turn my phone light off, and after a few seconds, I manage to do so. The padding becomes quieter, and I hear one last screech from whatever it was. I've never been so scared in all my life. Edit. Okay, I've called up the pub manager for some more work. He asked me in for a shift tonight. I'll take pictures tonight. They'll be posted when this post is about 13 hours old. I'll let you guys know what happens on my way back. Edit. Just leaving now. Wish me luck. Edit. I said I'd deliver. Well, f*** me. I took some pictures of my cycle home to try and verify the story as much as possible. I'm pretty shaken at the moment, as I'll explain below. So on my way home, I was absolutely shitting myself. As it's the only reasonable route home, I had to do it, and sooner than later. So here I was, beginning the long journey home. As I went further in, it opens up to a connecting road which is quite open, although it has woods either side. I very rarely see cars on this road, and I don't recall seeing any at nighttime. After cycling for a few minutes, I heard the same scream I heard a month back. I was fucking scared. The first time wasn't just some stupid coincidence. It sounded far away and didn't seem as though it was directed toward me. I kept my light off this time, except for taking pictures. I assumed whatever it was didn't see me, but I began to fucking pump it home. This is when it gets bad. Throughout the forest in all directions, I heard what must have been at least 10 other screams, all sounding exactly the same, all in harmony. I honestly thought that was it. I thought I was dead any second. So fucking happy to be home, and I fucking delivered. I don't know what this is, but I don't want to fuck with them. I have some images I took while cycling away, after hearing the screeches. If anyone is able to brighten them and find any evidence, please do. Are woods of deer and foxes, no mountain lions or boars. I know what they both sound like. My house has a lot of wooded land surrounding it. They sound nothing like what I heard. I can still hear it, ringing in my head. I'm so fucking scared I don't know what to do. If anyone wants to investigate this, please PM me. Story 11. I was 16 and living in Chicago in the infamous South Shore neighborhood. We lived in a basement apartment, aka a garden apartment. My mom was sick and was begging me to go to the store a block away to get an Arizona iced tea for her. She gave me the money and I left no problems. The owner of the store knew me and my mom and would watch out for me. Plus, I knew how to handle myself if things got violent. Well, this man, I'm guessing somewhere between 25 to 30, begins following me at the corner of my house. I try to brush it off and hurry to the store. He comes in and follows me through the aisles. Eventually, as I'm grabbing the drink from the fridge, he offers to buy it for me. I refused, telling him I can do it on my own. He doubles down and offers me $60 in food stamps on the condition I have sex with him in his car outside. If you don't know the street currency, that's 30 USD cash. I refuse, tell him I'm only 16 years old, thinking it would scare him off. He then offers me $100 in food stamps. I tell him there was no way and make sure to chat up the store owner and ask him to call my mom for me, to tell her I got what you wanted. That way this guy would know that the owner knew me and that someone was home with me. Rushed home and told my mom about the interaction and she didn't send me out alone anymore. That should be the end of it, right? Well, jump to a week later. I'm in bed and burning hot. Normally I take off my clothes and head back to bed. This time something felt off. I turn on the bedside lamp and I see the same man laying on his side looking through the tiny basement windows right at me. He was jerking himself off. I screamed. My mom ran into my room as he was getting up to run off. Thankfully, my mom was fed up with the place anyways, and we moved the next week into a hotel while we searched for a new apartment. Definitely scary. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is the most disturbing, disgusting, scariest thing I've ever heard. What a piece of shit. I'm glad you're okay. Story 12. It was pretty early in the morning and I heard some weird noise downstairs. My wife was out of town with her mom, so just me and the cats in the house. They were both in the bed with me and also looked kind of freaked out. So I get up slowly and hear another loud crash, glass breaking type noise. I didn't own a gun or anything at the time, so I was looking around for some sort of weapon, which ended up being this brass vase thing I kept changing. I grabbed that and creeped downstairs, slightly freaking out. More noises. Then a noise. Turns out I left the back door wide open and my goat wandered into the kitchen and shit everywhere and broke a shelf. I yelled at the goat and he went back outside. Story 13. About 6 months ago, I was home alone, and I get a knock on the front door. Now, I'm always cautious of people at the front door, because my front door is set back on the side of my house out of view. There were two large security-looking men in big black suits and greasy hair. They asked as they peered around me, "Do you live here alone?" I said no, pretending I had a husband or something. Then they asked, "Does your dog bite? And is your house secure?" Then I asked where they were from again, and with one last look around me through to the house, they said, "We'll come back later. Maybe you'll be more cooperative." Now, it doesn't sound scary, but home alone at 23, this still freaked me out. This frightened me for weeks. I immediately went to the neighbors thinking they had spoken to these men as well. My neighbor said no, she hadn't, but she assumed they were friends of mine as their car was in my driveway almost every day this week. I worked during the day. I called the cops and felt sort of silly, but basically wanted them to know that if I turn up dead, I know who did it. They took it very seriously, and after a squad car was sent out, I got a call later that evening. They said men matching the description were persons interested in a break-and-enter raid near Tea Tree Plaza, Adelaide. They sent a car out to see me and did regular checks for the next 3 nights. Still, I can't wait to move. 3 more months and I'll be out of this house away from whoever those men were. With all of the stories you usually hear, It's nice to see one where the cops did their jobs. Story 14. I worked as a park ranger for a few summers. It was a great job, but the downside was dealing with the public. I have tons of crazy stories, but only one extremely creepy story. I was scheduled to close the park one night with another girl. The park opened at dawn and closed at dusk. The closing duties were to drive around and make sure everyone was out of the park and close the gates. You had to make sure everyone was out or else they would get locked inside. Kristen and I got into a truck together to check the day-use picnic area, both campgrounds and all bathrooms. When we left the upper lot, there were no cars in the parking lot of the ranger station. Important later. We cruised around and checked all areas. All was good, so we drove back up to the gate and ranger station to close up. I got out to close the gate and jumped back into the truck. Kristen pointed out that while we were gone, a Jeep had parked in the parking lot. We thought this was super weird since we hadn't seen anyone park there earlier. But whatever. We parked the truck a couple of spots away from the Jeep and got out. I figured we'd just tell the person to leave and then we could go home. As we approached the vehicle, we could barely see someone sitting in the driver's seat. We had dim street lamps, so we knew someone was in there. I waved and got no response. No movement. Kristen knocked on the window, but the person didn't respond. We both started feeling like something was wrong. I got chills standing there and we both stepped away from the Jeep, alarmed at the lack of response. We both decided to get our boss, who lived across the street, on site. We weren't supposed to bother him at night, but this was too weird. He got his shoes on and walked over with us. As we were crossing the street, we saw the door to the Jeep slowly open. Then all three of us saw a figure creep out of the vehicle and crawl underneath. All we saw was a shadow since there wasn't a lot of light. All of us were scared shitless. It was something out of a horror movie. Kristen got on the phone with the police while my boss and I slowly approached the vehicle. My boss told the person they needed to leave and that we were calling the cops. We could see someone sitting under the lifted Jeep, near the front tires. The person wasn't moving or responding. Once the police showed up, they were visibly freaked out too. They had guns drawn and everything. It turned out to be some person tripping on meth. We had no idea why they showed up at the park or what they were doing there, but the cops did find drugs and a loaded gun in the vehicle. After that night, my boss changed all policies regarding closing duties. He added extra closers and we had to carry mace. It was truly terrifying to witness someone creep out of their car and scramble like an animal underneath. It was like she was possessed.
What's the scariest story you've ever heard? Real or fake, internet or not? Story 1. About 10 years ago, I was recently divorced and living alone in a one-bedroom apartment. The place was clean and the rent was decent. One of those places that had a doorman. I felt safe here. I was alone and loving it, focused on my career and not on my clingy ex-husband. Things were finally looking up for me. At the time, I was working pretty late at the office and would often stumble into my apartment sleep-deprived in the early hours of the morning and wake up by 6:30, 7-ish to start the day. I started noticing that in the morning, my door would be unlocked sometimes. I usually dismissed this as my sleep-dead brain, thinking that the bed looked more appealing than locking the door. Another thing that I noticed since moving in was that I seemed to misplace things more than I used to. Little things like a hairbrush or nail polish, that sort of thing. It wasn't really that big of a deal, just enough to be a slight annoyance in my day. The longer I lived there, the more frequently I seemed to forget to lock the door. At first it was every once in a while, then it seemed like an almost daily occurrence. More things went missing. Things like pictures, shaving razors, and most disturbingly, my underwear. This went on for long enough that I started to get a little paranoid. I started to take the time at night to make sure the door was locked. I got into a habit of every night after I locked the door to turn the handle 3 times and say to myself, "It's locked, it's locked, it's locked." Time after time I would wake up and the door would be unlocked. One time I even tried staying up all night to watch the door, but I ended up falling asleep in my chair. I decided that my mind was not reliable enough to stay up all night, so I invested in a video camera. I went all out and bought the fanciest camera that I could get my hands on. So one night, I set the camera up facing the door. I hid the camera under a pile of towels on the floor. I locked the door and went to bed. When I woke up, my apartment looked normal. Nothing missing that I could see. I decided to check the tape. I fast-forwarded through hours of footage, not seeing anything. I was just about to give up when I noticed the handle of the door jitter. Then it slowly crept open. A figure slid through the half-open door and walked towards the camera. It paused, looked around as if it was listening for something, then walked forward into direct view of the camera. I paused the camera, and the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck started to rise. I was staring directly into the face of the maintenance man of the building. I could see those big, thick glasses and curly hair. I had no doubt who it was. I played the tape a little more. He looked comfortable as he walked around the apartment. Then he turned and walked towards my bedroom and out of the view of the camera. I didn't know what to do. Sobbing, I called the police. I tried to explain over the phone, but couldn't. Soon enough, 2 officers arrived at my doorstep. I told them everything and showed them the tape. I remember seeing the blood drain from their faces. They promised me that I was safe and that they were going to get this guy. They needed to lie down but didn't want to be alone. One of the officers offered to stand outside my apartment door as I took a nap. As I was laying in bed, unable to sleep but too drained to move, something kept nagging at me. I lay there for a few minutes, tossing and turning, unable to get comfortable or rest. My mind was racing. Then a realization slowly washed over me and chilled me to the bone. We watched the tape and saw the man enter my home, but we never saw him leave. I froze, then started shaking. I needed to get to the front door. I sat up and looked around the room. I couldn't see anyone. I swung my legs over the side of the bed cautiously. My feet hit the cold wood floor and I felt warm breath on my ankles. I raced out of my apartment as fast as I could and to the safety of the police officer. He called for backup. They found the man under my bed, clutching a knife and a Polaroid camera. Story 2. A friend of mine was remembering her childhood. She and her brother were playing at their home, and her mother and aunt were in the kitchen making lunch. As the kids were running around the house playing, the girl sees an old woman sitting in the living room. The old woman looks up at the girl and smiles. The girl can still hear her mother in the kitchen, and her brother playing outside. The old woman, still smiling, beckons the girl over to her chair and says, "Sweetie, your mother is very tired in taking care of you. She's tired and sick of having you around the house. Nobody here wants or loves you, and you have to come with me. You're going to live with me now." The old woman reaches out to grab the girl's arm and the mother calls from the kitchen. The girl runs into the kitchen and tells her mom in tears about the old woman in the living room. They go look and the woman is gone. Those social workers are crafty motherfuckers. Story 3. This happened to me, and it still freaks me out when I'm home alone. When I was 16 a few summers ago, my parents went out for the day, and my sister left to go out too. I lived in an average small suburban neighborhood. I was stuck in the house, bored with my dog with nobody else home. It was really hot in the living room, so I turned on the air conditioner. For that to happen, I need to open the garage door, because the butt of the air conditioner faces in there and the garage gets overheated. Usually when we do this, we lock the garage door that leads into the living room, but this one time I forgot. I sat down in my room and relaxed, not thinking much of it. Bad idea. A few hours later in the living room, I hear my dog barking like a maniac. I almost ignored it, but went into the living room and heard the doorknob on the garage door jiggling. I assumed that my sister came home, so I yelled, "It's not locked!" She didn't respond back. The doorknob jiggled more violently. I walked in and went to the door yelling again, "It's not..." When the door opened, it felt like slow motion. The door creaked open a sliver of crack, and that's all I needed to see. I just saw the feet. Huge dark brown hiking boots of a man. Not my sister. I immediately pushed on the door to close it again and started screaming and crying hysterically. I'm a small girl, but I struggled to push it to shut and locked it. He started pounding on the door, but then it stopped. Hysterically crying and screaming, I scooped up my dog and ran into the kitchen to get a knife. When I went into the kitchen, I heard the gate in the backyard open and quick footsteps down the cement path. Like in the horror movies, with tears streaming down my face, I screamed, "No!" Dog in one hand and knife in the other, I threw the knife on the floor and ran to lock the back door. When I quickly bent down on the kitchen floor to pick up the knife, my legs were shaking from being so scared. My weak legs gave out and I fell forward almost onto my face. I tried to scramble to my feet, but ended up crawling and tripping on the kitchen floor, and I accidentally scratched a long shallow cut in my bare foot with the knife. I hid under the dining room table and said my prayers. I thought this was it. This is how I'm going to die. Here in the quiet, empty house with my dog as a witness. I held my mouth to cover my crying when I heard footsteps approach the back door. My heart was racing a million beats a minute, and I had the knife tightly clenched in my hand as I waited for him to make his next move. I saw his shadow through the blinds looking to the window. He stood there for a while, and then walked out. The police never found him. To this day, I always make sure the door is locked when the garage door is open. I don't know what would have happened if my dog didn't bark and alerted me that there was a man trying to break in. I would have been in my room completely unaware until it was too late. Story 4. It's late. There are 3 people on a subway train sitting in a row. 2 men and a woman in the middle. A teenage gal walks in the subway and sits across from the 3 strangers. The woman in the middle has an expressionless look on her face while the 2 men are staring directly into the teenager's eyes. Shortly after, a businessman enters the subway and sits next to the teenager. After a few minutes, he pulls out his notepad and writes, "Get off the next stop. Trust me." When the next stop comes, the teenager and the businessman get up to exit the cab when the 2 men verbally try to stop them. When they get off, the man explains to the teenager that the woman in the middle of the 2 men was dead, and that they were after her next. I heard this when I was in 7th grade, and it always freaked me out. Story 5. In rural southern Illinois, a toy company began selling realistic baby dolls to expectant mothers. But apparently, after the mother had her child, the toy baby would start crying. Eventually, the rocking motion advertised to calm it down wouldn't work, and you couldn't get it to stop without shaking it. Eventually, when it started crying, the parent would have to beat it, and even the beatings and thrashings would have to get harder and harder to get it to be quiet. The only thing that seemed to shut the baby doll up permanently was to bash its head against the wall to destroy whatever mechanism triggered the crying. On more than one occasion, though, neighbors called the authorities to report child abuse, and when the police arrived, they found the bloody remains of infants smeared across the walls and the floor. In most cases, the mother couldn't understand why the police were there. She said that she had just got rid of the stupid doll. She calmly stated as she rocked a baby-shaped bundle in her arms. Story 6. Girl babysitting late at night. She sees a dude outside of the sliding glass door and calls the cops. The cops come and see that there are muddy footprints inside the house. The dude wasn't outside, he was inside. What the babysitter saw was his reflection. Shudder. Story 7. I got to a nice Catholic church with my parents on occasion. They enjoy the early mass, so I went to the 7 o'clock service. I've known the priests for quite some time and am on a personal basis with them, even though I no longer am a regular. I was shooting the shit with the priest as he was saying goodbye to families and preparing for the next service. He normally asks how you are, etc. One such couple he did not recognize, so I talked to them as I stood by. He asked who they were and how they were doing. With the saddest look of fighting to keep her tears back, she informed us of their situation. Their son was recently killed in the Aurora shootings. This was but the day after, and our whole town was still in shock. He went aside with them, so I left bummed out about the situation. I came back a week later and talked with a priest. He helped the family through the process of losing their son, the funeral, emotions. He also had to bless their son before taking him to the mortuary. The parents were advised that no matter how hard it was to not see their son for the last time, they should avoid it. He was shot in the head. The priest told me that when he went to bless the body, nothing was really done. Not that anything could be done. Brain matter, blood, the lack of half a face. He said a final goodbye to the son for the parents, blessed him and left. It isn't necessarily a scary story, but the look in the priest's eyes scared the shit out of me. They went right through me as he explained it. He was still seeing it. I almost felt like I could see it in his eyes. I will never forget that look ever. Story 8. I had a friend that grew up deep in the Appalachia. He once admitted that as a child, he would sometimes look up from his bed at night to see a green face watching him. It would move its mouth like it was saying something, but it was silent. He would always try to convince himself he was dreaming and would rattle off prayers until he fell asleep. Never did anything other than watch him, so he eventually discounted it as a normal phenomenon of dream time. He switched rooms a few times as he got older, and strangely, he'd stop seeing the face. But when he'd move back into that room, the face would return. He'd never told anyone. His family was deeply religious, so he wanted to avoid any freakouts about demons or the devil. After college, he and his brother were reminiscing, and he finally asked his brother, "When you were staying in that room, did you ever see—" To which his brother interrupted, "A green face?" He said he turned white because he'd really convinced himself it wasn't real. Both of them were too nervous to talk about it more except to confirm it was just a green face that watched them and mumbled inaudibly. After visiting home, they refused to sleep in that room. There's something super creepy about a disembodied voyeur. Story 9. A young girl is playing in her bedroom and she hears her mother call to her from the kitchen, so she runs downstairs to meet her mother. As she's running through the hallway, the door to the cupboard under the stairs open, and a hand reaches out and pulls her in. It's her mother. She whispers to the child, "Don't go into the kitchen. I heard it too." Story 10. I once had a friend tell me about a girl she knew who met up with a guy she met on some online dating site. They met for dinner, and afterward he walked her to her car. He kept trying to get her to go home with him. She declined all invites, and eventually they kissed goodnight and went to their separate ways. A few days later, she gets some weird bumps on her lips and goes to the doctor. After examining her, the doctor seems legitimately worried and asks her about her most recent romantic encounter, because what she has is some sort of bacteria or something on her lips that you can only get from a decomposing body. Long creepy ass story short, the internet guy gets busted with like 4 dead female bodies in his apartment that he had been going down on and having sex with. Could be total bullshit, but that story creeped me the fuck out for weeks. Story 11. I'm a camp counselor, and I told a variation of the Slenderman story where he's a traditional fae that followed colonists to the New World and went insane and started killing people by stalking the naughty children who stayed out late. Oh, and by the way, my gimmick as a storyteller is that all my stories are true. And I worked up to this story over 4 weeks, starting with a tame shit, and I ended with that. All my campers were crying, as were some of my coworkers. I scared myself so much that I refused to leave my cabin after full dark for the remaining 3 days I was there. Story 12. A man is driving on a regular route along the highway when he notices a turnoff that will take him up through the mountains. He figures he drives this way all the time but has never taken the mountain path, even though it will only take him a few hours longer to reach his destination. As a spur-of-the-moment decision, he takes the turn and begins his journey up the winding road. He'd started his drive later in the day than usual, so the sky is getting dark as he approaches the top, but the view is gorgeous. While he continues, he gets a small chill up the base of his neck, but dismisses it as a cool mountain air. Not long after, he has to slow his car as he approaches what appears to be a nasty car accident. 2 cars completely totaled. looking like they hit each other head on just after rounding a corner. The man can see a few bodies on the ground, all bloodied and not moving. Immediately he knows he has to pull over and help, but he can't stop some sixth sense telling him something about the scene is wrong, like it isn't natural. He decides he's going to drive his car forward and park it just beyond the crash site before getting out to help. He slowly creeps by the wreck and manages a better look at one of the bodies. It's definitely human, but something seems amiss, but he still can't place it. He rolls the car forward maybe 6 meters from the crash site. As he's about to come to a stop and open his door to investigate, he looks out his front windshield for a moment. It's gone terribly dark now, nearly pitch black, when something in his rearview mirror catches his eye. Several somethings, in fact. As he gazes into the mirror in horror, he can see the bodies of the crash site illuminated by his rear lights. All of them are sitting up, staring directly at his car, eyes like glowing orbs in the mirror. He panics as suddenly more people come out from the ditches and forests surrounding the road, but only when the crash victim bodies begin to stand, seemingly fine, no limps or dragging themselves, does he have the presence of mind to throw the car back into drive. By the time the first people are taking careful steps toward the vehicle, he's already speeding as fast as he can around the bend and getting the hell out of the mountain. Nothing ever came for him, nor did it seem he was ever followed. Sometimes he wonders if his mind played a trick on him, but still, to this day, he always checks his rearview mirror before ever stepping out of the car. Story 13. A girl in her teens gets called upon to babysit some kids on a Friday evening. Apparently, she watches those 2 girls pretty regularly. Anyway, the parents leave for the evening and said they wouldn't be home until around midnight. The teenager puts the 2 young girls to bed around 9 p.m. She does what most people would do, goes downstairs and watches TV for a while. She watches TV for an hour or so, and by this point, it's getting pretty late. She's in the living room on the main level, and the TV sits in the corner of the room, with large windows on each side of it. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eyes, she sees what she thinks is someone walking by the window outside through the bushes. Naturally, she gets pretty freaked out. She ends up calling 911 and the police arrive. The police checked outside, but don't find any signs of anyone walking around. I guess it was winter with the snow on the ground. The police officers assure her she's safe and that the lighting from both the TV and lamp probably played tricks on her by reflecting off the window. The teen agrees that's probably what it was, yet asks them to check inside the house for her just to be safe. The police reluctantly oblige and start randomly checking rooms, closets, and the garage a bit haphazardly. They roll their eyes a bit as they wonder how much this girl's imagination has run wild. Well, it turns out they find a man hiding underneath one of the little girl's beds. I guess as the story goes, it was the little girl's mother's ex-husband. The babysitter didn't see someone walk past the window outside. What she saw was the reflection of him walking behind the couch. Story 14. So back in the 1970s, my mom was a teenager living in Houston. She and her 9 siblings lived in the Heights, which she says is a nice neighborhood now, but at the time was something of a slum. Her family was super poor. Anyways, my mom had a crush on one of her brother's friends. She was around 14 or 15 at the time. He was a few years older, but she was in love. His name was Mark. Well, around this time, boys started disappearing from the neighborhood. They weren't leaving notes or telling anyone that they were leaving. The families were calling the police, but the police weren't doing anything about it. They decided that the boys had run away and never really looked into it further. After all, these were poor kids living in a bad neighborhood. They ran away all the time. Life goes on. One day, Mark disappears too. Meanwhile, my mom's younger brother is hitching a ride out to the beach to go fishing. He did this on a regular basis and would bum a ride from anyone. On the way to the beach, the guy driving the car stops to fill up the gas tank. The guy working at the gas station, Mom says they called him Weird Larry, sees my uncle and asks who he's with. My uncle replies that he doesn't actually know the guy. Larry won't let my uncle go any further and makes him get out of the car. The driver goes on without him. Now then, 3 years have passed since the boys started disappearing, and they finally find out what happened. A man had been paying 2 boys to lure teenage boys to his house, where he drugged them, strapped them to a wooden board, tortured them, raped them, and killed them. There were at least 28 victims, and Mark Scott was one of them. The only reason they found out was that the 2 teenagers murdered the serial killer, then told the police about all of the murders and led them to some of the bodies. And guess who picked up my uncle that day he was going fishing?
Ship crewman, what was the creepiest experience you had out in the ocean?
Story 1. Not a ship, but you know in the movies the creaking sounds in a submarine from the pressure when going deep? The first time you hear them for real is a bit unnerving. Story 2. Worked for a bit as a deckhand on fishing boats out of San Diego. A few times we would come across deserted small boats, pangas, drifting with outlandishly big motors. Every time, the captain would just cut hard port or starboard to get away from them as quickly as possible. I knew there were running boats that had probably dropped off their cargo, but I would check them out with the binoculars if we were close. One had 2 people on it. Both had clearly been shot a bunch of times, and one was moving and fairly alive. I told the captain, got a disapproving headshake, and we were on our way. Story 3. 6 years ago. Deep fog, like I couldn't see the front of the yacht, sailing, and it was only 50 feet.
The real creepy part came from the radar system tracking the boats and ships around us. Radar, not being a commercial shipping or fisherman spec, was not quite as accurate, so sometimes boats would disappear, be right on top of us, or appear in sight but not on the radar. That, on top of the sheer quantity of marine debris throughout the ocean, made me really scared that some boats had sunk when they dropped off the radar. Story 4. The doldrums. You spend a year or two at sea watching the waves and winds blowing constantly, and then one day they stop. Not so much as a whisper of wind, and the sea is like glass. It feels as if time has stopped. Realizing how creepy it feels, the captain calls for an all-stop and goes dead in the water. Like a horror movie, everyone migrates topside and just stares at the horizon. No one says a word and you can hear yourself breathe. He lets the ship rest there for an hour and the sailors freak out, panic and set in quickly with the green crew. The only thing the captain says when we get underway is, "Men, this is the doldrums." The knew what he was doing. Story 5. I got to see glowing algae on top of the ocean in the middle of the night, having a smoke on the upper decks and after my watch on a warship. Surreal, and extremely uncommon, but a memory I'll have for the rest of my life. Story 6. Not a crewman myself, but I'm fortunate enough to know a lovely guy called Ron Warwick, who was the captain of Cunard's Queen Elizabeth II liner for years. I once asked him what the oddest thing he'd ever seen at sea was. His reply was precisely this: "I saw a wave once. It was quite big." I have to say I was a bit disappointed. I mean, we've all seen big waves, but a mutual friend suggested I look it up. It turns out, Ron was talking about this monster, the Rogue Wave. Story 7. Came upon an empty life raft in the middle of the Atlantic. In all likelihood, it was probably an accidental discharge. Maybe a crew member was f***ing around with a release or something. Who knows? The implications otherwise are very disturbing though. Did a ship go down with all hands without anyone making it to the raft? Was the raft abandoned for some reason? It left me feeling vaguely disturbed for a while afterward. Story 8. U.S. Marine here. During a float on a boat to Operation Top Secret, Destination Unknown, one of our own was lost at sea. I guess they just jumped overboard at night or something. Kinda depressing. That's a way to die. Anyways, their coffin rack was adjacent to mine, and we left the rack made, and for some reason, the sheets kept on getting messed up every day. It was a pain in the ass to keep making the sheets. We stripped the rack, and we figured that no one should be sleeping in there since there were plenty of other vacant racks in the berth thing. But someone would keep making the rack and messing the sheets up in the morning. I know aircraft carriers are big, but could someone really fake their own death on one and get away with it? There's no way someone would be sleeping there because we'd noticed someone climbing up on the top bunk, and the duty would have been posted at the entrances to the berthing. It was just creepy seeing the rack being made neatly and then messed up in the morning. Story 9. Cousin is a ship captain or something. One time they were loading cargo from Bandar Abbas Bay in Iran to transport to Abu Dhabi in the UAE. A cat had climbed on board without anyone noticing. Halfway through the Persian Gulf, she began meowing like crazy and they all legit got spooked. Some started saying ghosts or thinking they were legit sailing in haunted waters. After 3 hours of shipmates searching like crazy, they finally found her hiding between cargo containers. They dropped her off in Abu Dhabi as an illegal immigrant. Story 10. Not ship crew, but one of 3 guys sailing a 45-foot Morgan from Antigua to Daytona Beach, Florida. I had zero crossing experience prior to this trip. Anywho, I pictured getting tan, pina coladas, and white sand beaches. Nope. It was an open ocean, at least by landlubber standards, and 3-hour shifts round the clock manning the helms, GPS, and radar while the other 2 guys chilled during the day or slept at night. It was hard as hell, and I've done a few things considered somewhat tough and out of the ordinary. The biggest worry while on autopilot are the bazillions of ships flying around throughout the Caribbean. Yes, you can see them from many miles away, especially at night with the help of a radar, but they sneak up on you. And a 600-foot freighter captained by a possibly hammered crewman in the wheelhouse at 2 in the morning wouldn't even feel a bump as it split us into kindling. So one night I'm on shift, trying to stay awake with Snickers and coffee, and it's so black you couldn't discern the horizon line. Just stars, blackness, and the running lights of lots of far-off freighters going in all directions. I proceed to take my occasional 360-degree glance around like I was told to make sure there's also nothing coming up aft. And oh my god. There's this giant round yellow light stretching what seemed like across the entire sky directly behind me. Clearly, this was a freighter directly behind our boat with some kind of a spotlight on the bow trained on us, and about to gobble us up like Jonah. The rush of terror was so great I couldn't even stomp on the deck to awaken my mates, let alone scream for help. So I just accepted my impending death and wondered if it would be the impact or drowning that killed me first. Then I focused a little harder and realized it wasn't a ship at all. It was a full moon rising. I can't describe the immediate relief. It was like waking from the most terrifying dream you've ever had and realizing, holy smokes, I'm not running from Freddy Krueger. I'm in my bed. Sailing a crossing like that, I learned, is hours and hours and sometimes days and days of endless boredom punctuated with short periods of silence. Story 11. I don't know if this was creepy exactly, but it sure scared us. Up by Alaska and rough seas, our office was below the waterline on the outside of the ship, and right below a sponson. There was a full-size I-beam running around the outside edge of the office. It was probably 10 inches wide, and we used it as a shelf, storing full-size binders on it. One day in rough weather, 6 of us were in the office, 3 officers, 3 enlisted, when we heard an enormous bang, so loud that our ears rang, and all of us jumped out of our seats. After checking to make sure we weren't taking on water, and calling damage control, we started looking around to determine what could have caused it. We couldn't find anything. Nothing came loose, nothing had fallen, the dry tank below the office was still dry, etc. We eventually noticed that the I-beam had cracked. Not a hairline fracture, not a little split, but the entire beam had separated lengthwise by about 5 millimeters. We took a wave up under the sponson with so much energy that it bowed in the hull of the ship and split the beam, but the beam didn't ever go back to the original length. The crack was also precise and even. You could slide a pencil in the gap all the way back to the bulkhead. In fact, the split was so wide they couldn't wield it directly closed. They had to cut a 5 millimeter shim to fill the gap. It was amazing. We had hundreds of people come through the office for the next couple of weeks to see it. A couple of people tried to calculate the energy needed to instantly separate the I-beam. That was 4 feet away from where we were sitting, but it was too scary to contemplate. Story 12. A friend, a captain, asked me to help deliver a sailboat from Fort Lauderdale to Houston. I was somewhat an inexperienced sailor, only sailed for fun a few times, short trips. But he was able to get me $100 a day, so I said, why not? I was between jobs. There was 3 of us, me, my captain, who was a very experienced sailor, and the new owner of the ship. Once we got to Anna Maria Island in the west coast of Florida, we prepared for the longest haul of our trip. The first time we'll be away from the coast going through the Gulf of Mexico. We did a 4-hour shift, then you'd get to sleep or do whatever for 8 hours until your next 4 hours. The eerie part for me was my shift. Alone, pitch black, darkness in the middle of the ocean, no moon out. You also have to avoid a lot of small oil rigs, some still active, some not active, some marked with lights, some not. You'd hear unexplainable sounds, etc. I don't know if it was just my head with me, but that one overnight shift was pretty tense and scary for me. Toward the end of my shift, we hit some pretty bad rains and rough seas. My captain took over, I went to bed. I get woken up a bit later to crazy rough seas. I go back on deck and my captain and the owner of the ship just yell, "We have to turn back. We lost our GPS." Apparently the wind knocked it off the top of the mast and into the ocean. So there we are now, rough seas, pitch black, and with no GPS. Luckily my captain is old school and knows how to sail with just a chart. So we made it back to Anna Maria and purchased a new GPS. The whole event was just surreal, and I was definitely worried a few times. The rest of the trip was uneventful. The next nights had nice bright moons and calm seas that made it a little less eerie. Story 13. Not creepy, but gross. I was chumming and cutting bait at 5 a.m. on Jeffrey's Ledge in New England. I kept hearing weird splashing sounds every few minutes, but it was still dark. I was a noob at that time. Around 5:30, I could see a little better, but not great. I think I kept seeing a buoy looking like a giant road cone popping up out of the water, then it would disappear again. I was full on, what the f***? The captain comes out on the deck and catches me staring off into the sea. He looks out, the road cone pops up a few hundred yards off. He looks back at me and starts laughing his ass off. "How long have you been watching that whale mast?" Humpback whales mast by rolling around on the surface of the water using the splash as friction. Story 14. Found a sailboat adrift after a storm in the Atlantic with nobody aboard. We decided to tow it to Florida. A couple of us went aboard to attach the line. There was a foot of water and tons of bondage floating around in it. Never found out who the owner was, reported it in Key West and left it in the harbor. Story 15. I worked as a deckhand on a private 53-foot yacht. I helped deliver it from the east coast of the US to the Virgin Islands with a pit stop in Bermuda. En route to Bermuda, I wake up and head up to accompany the guy on watch. He looks pretty disturbed and points up. Our cockpit had a cloth bimini with a plastic window on the top. Roof thing over the helm for you non-nautical folks. On the plastic window are 2 boot prints in the salt residue. There's no way anyone could stand in the bimini. It's cloth and would have broken. We never figured out how it happened and the captain brushed it off, probably so I wouldn't be freaked out since it was my first time at sea. Not terrifying, definitely weird. It could have been a prank, but no one was laughing. And who would risk losing their boots overboard for a stupid prank? Story 16. I sail on tall ships, with temp crews of young people, 16 to 18 usually. We discourage ghost or creepy stories because there's always some kid who gets inspired and takes it too far. And between rig climbings and weather and the general danger of being at sea, we really don't want that. So no outright creepy stuff, but the sea can be plenty eerie. Being in thick fog and hearing sounds that seem close by, but usually aren't, can be pretty chilling. Buoys that have sound signals can sound spooky as hell. The way the eye tries to make sense of distances when the sea is mostly flat can be really alarming. Look out. I thought that thing was a mile off and now it is at our bow. Then there's the time we were in the middle of the Atlantic and the main anchor started letting out just after I came off evening watch. I dashed out of the mess and went onto the foredeck to ram on the brakes, which turned out later to be about 2 to 3 seconds before the anchor and chain combined would have been too heavy to haul back in. We had been pounding in an 8-meter swell for days, so I assumed the brakes and the slip must have just rattled loose in their relentless motion. But the bosun swore up and down that he double secured the slip with a rope and that there was no way it could have come loose on its own. Story 17. This was over 30 years ago. We were living abroad, a 22-day, our first boat. We pulled into a dock and we were trying to sleep. We heard the crackling sound, almost like twigs burning. It was very concerning. I was trying to figure out what was wrong with my boat. Our neighbor didn't help. He said it was fiberglass worms. Apparently, this is some mollusk that attaches itself to the hull and clicks in some way that the hull picked up and amplified. Story 18. First day on my first ship ever. It's winter and like 30 degrees, and the steel bulkheads, racks, etc. are cold. Shipmate is nice enough to give me a small electric alarm clock to use the next morning. I climb in my rack and put the alarm over my head, kinda under the pillow, and crash. At 2 a.m., I woke up after feeling something weird. Something just ran across my boot camp shaved head. I open my eyes and stare into the darkness. Then something else runs across my head. I turn on my overhead light in my rack and about 24 roaches run for their lives. They were nesting on my alarm clock in my head to keep warm. Yes, this was a new guy joke. Yes, I used it later on someone else. No, it was almost 30 years ago and I haven't forgotten. I still feel them sometimes. Same ship, out at sea. Took a shortcut through the civilian berthing, bedrooms area. About 15 of them were sitting around a TV watching animal. Some were laughing, but others were too focused. Another ship, out at sea. When emergencies happen, it doesn't matter who you are sometimes, you have to get dirty. A line ruptured and flooded several spaces with pitch black oil, about neck high. On top of that, we were sure there were a few bodies in there. I and a buddy had to climb into the oil pool and wade through 2 rooms to get the pumps placed and confirm other things. Power's cut off, of course, so we had nothing but flashlights. Yes, we found one of the bodies. The other guy was actually elsewhere napping on the job. Probably saved his own life. There are plenty more, but those are the first 3. Story 19. We had a naval chief petty officer die of a heart attack while underway on board our sub. Since we were doing spec ops off the USSR coastline, we could not surface and come off the station for 60 days. So every time we had to go into the freezer to get food, there was the chief laying on the shelf with his eyes wide open and frozen. He was wrapped in a cling wrap material so you could see his face clearly. So next time you open your freezer at night, just think of having to look at someone's face looking back at you. Story 20. I was sailing as a cadet in a 1,000-foot-plus container ship crossing the Atlantic during the middle of winter, leaving the Mediterranean and heading to Halifax. We were in 40 to 50-foot seas. I was sent to check the side port, a hatch on the side of the ship used for taking on stores or a pilot. Our sister ship had a case where her side port was leaking during rough seas. I went down 11 stories to the engine room and took the tunnel to the side port. The ship has 2 tunnels that run the length of the ship from the engine room at the stern all the way forward to the windlass at the bow. As I was in the tunnel, it looked all the way forward, nearly 1,000 feet forward. I could see the ship twisting as we took each wave. Steel was moaning so loudly that it was extremely unnerving to a new mariner. What I saw on the side port was more unnerving. Every time we took a wave, water would rush through the cracks. Luckily, there was a bilge pump to take care of that. My job over the next few days was to make sure the pump was keeping up. Story 21. Not saw, but heard. Well, that's not entirely true. Another crew member did claim he saw another boat right around sunset, but I never saw it. Anyway, I'm alone on the bridge of this private yacht I worked on. I wanted the bridge time, and the only time to get it was at night as I was the new guy. So I'm on the bridge alone and I'm messing with a radio just out of boredom. All of a sudden, I hear a little girl's voice asking if there's anyone out there. I respond normally and ask if she needs anything. I'm assuming she's playing with Dad's radio. She says she hasn't heard from anyone in a really long time. Says she's been at sea for what seemed like forever. I ask her if she's with her family and she says they're here, but they won't talk to her anymore. She says they're all, this really creeped me out, all getting really angry and screaming at each other all the time. I ask the name of her boat and she tells me the name of a ship I knew to have sunk 6 years ago in the same area. I'm really creeped out now, considering waking someone up. I asked her if she needs anything and her reply still haunts me. She says, I need about $350. Story 22. I've spent about 9 years out at sea, and there were a couple of things that stuck with me. The very worst was a colleague hanging himself overboard on purpose, going next to a tornado off the coast of Taiwan and the massive waves around us. Hearing a PA from the captain to pick up a heavy tool and head on the back of a ship next to the handrail, and it was not a drill. Turned out that a ship that went past us in the opposite direction changed direction and started following us. Nothing came out of it. The very last one I remember was hearing a splash and start looking overboard to spot what fell in the water, only to realize it was dolphins playing. Story 23. Woke up at 3 a.m. to a search and rescue alarm. Former coastie. I book it to the boat, we launch and end up cruising along for a few hours. Everything is pitch black. One of the crew members is looking over the side at the bioluminescent algae being kicked up by our wake and says he saw something big roll over in our wake. We explained that it was probably a shark, and about 15 minutes later, a deep fog sets in. The fog is reflecting our running lights, so it looks like we're in a hallway or tunnel. Everyone gets a little tenser. We start keeping a close eye on the GPS, and then the fathometer alarm goes off, and we are in 5 feet of ocean. The alarm stops, we're in 300 feet, and then 3, and then 250, and then 6 feet. Something was swimming very close to the bottom of our boat. It was such an eerie experience. We never figured out what it was. Perhaps whales? Or the Kraken? We got to the boat we were rescuing and everything else was uneventful. There's something wonderful about being on the ocean in the middle of the night, but things can be very strange too. Story 24. I worked on a cruise ship going from the UK to Spain and back. Cross-channel ferry really, but quite big at 37,000 tons, 2,500 passengers. We had a turnaround of about 4 hours in Bilbao, and at this time, I worked in the restaurant. After we had cleaned up, they started hailing a passenger over the loudspeakers to disembark. I remember he had a slightly comical name like Passenger Peckham or Passenger Pickles or something. Then the managers came and told us to start searching our stations for him. Every bit of the ship was getting searched. They kept hailing him and us searching right up until the outbound passengers started embarking. They even had us searching in little cupboards and in fridges, etc. Obviously, Passenger Pickles had jumped off in the night into the cold Atlantic. So another time we were heading off at night during the winter gales and about 5 hours offshore around midnight, I finished my shift and headed off to a crafty little platform at the stern, where I could take my nightly reefer in peace, and I saw the massive bright ship's spotlights scanning slowly and methodically back and forth across the waves. I guess this was for a jumper, and sitting there slightly baked, I could imagine perhaps glimpsing a last sight of some poor doomed soul struggling to chop and wake before disappearing off into the vast black expanse of the Atlantic. An office later confirmed the spotlights that night were for someone who had apparently jumped off a ship that had passed in the opposite direction.
Serious. What is the most terrifying thing to happen to you in a well-lit and populated place? Story 1. I was taking my kids for a walk in the park near our apartment once when a guy and a woman came out of the tree line suddenly, and the guy said to give him my wallet and anything else in my pockets. He had some weird screwdriver or knife thing, and I pushed my daughter, my eldest child, behind me. I was going to do the same for my son, but the woman grabbed his other arm for some reason, and my heart felt like it was going to explode for some reason. I suddenly forgot about self-preservation and jumped forwards and broke the woman's nose. I felt a sharp pain under my ribs and looked to see that the man had just shanked me. But at this point, 2 other guys who had been jogging were running up and shouting. The police that patrolled the park showed up not long after that. I was sitting and trying not to bleed to death. The man had run off and his screwdriver was still in me. The woman was on the ground crying and shouting because I had also knocked the top front of her teeth loose or out. The 2 joggers were originally asking the woman if I was the assaulter, but the situation cleared up soon. I got taken to the hospital and questioned about the incident. There was a while when it looked like I was going to be charged with battery for the woman, since it turns out she actually had a decently well-off family and was just an addict. They tried to sue me, but it was thrown out and she was sentenced for attempted kidnapping. I had a tube in my chest for 2 weeks after my surgery to remove the shank, but it all cleared up after that. Just glad my kids are safe. Story 2. It wasn't me, but when I was still a college student, I witnessed firsthand the bystander effect. A friend and I had just ridden our waveboards like nerds from the engineering dorm down into the public square, Red Square at UW. We rode down nonstop from McCarty Hall, and we're sitting on the library steps watching the sunset. Across the way near the smokestacks, we saw a couple yelling at one another really exaggeratedly. The guy then grabbed the girl and started hauling her about. We were amused, as we thought they were just play fighting. There was a large group of students sitting right next to them, watching and doing nothing either. Nothing seemed wrong until he threw her to the ground and started dragging her towards the stairwell leading to the parking garage. During this time, a group of 5 girls left the garage and walked past. The girl, still being forcibly dragged, pleaded to them, "Please, help me." We could hear her clearly from across the square. The girls looked and did nothing and kept walking. Nobody on the stairs moved either. They just watched. My friend and I got up and started walking quickly toward them, but they disappeared into the stairwell before we got halfway across. There, we intercepted the girls who had passed them. "Did you see that?" They were asking amongst themselves, worriedly. I glared at them for not stopping. I sent my friend to Odegaard Library to have the help desk call the campus police. While he did that, I went into the stairwell and headed down the steps, all the while hearing the girl screaming while the guy kept hitting her and shouting at her. I got to the bottom platform, passing two people on their way up. One was joking about how it looked like the guy was going to kill his girlfriend. They were amused and unconcerned and ignored me. The bottom platform has double swinging doors that lead to a smaller room with an elevator, and then more doors leading directly into the garage. The guy and girl were in this room, and I was in the stairwell just outside. I waited there for campus police while the guy kept yelling and the girl kept crying. After about 30 seconds, he hit her again, hefted my waveboard, kicked the door open, and shouted, rather lamely, "Stop it, or I'll hit you." The girl took this opportunity to break free and run up the stairs. The guy, taller and more muscular than me, looked surprised as well but didn't move. He saw my club-like board and gave up immediately. He tried to explain that his girlfriend was threatening to have him deported. He was in the US illegally, past his visa or something, and he was trying to blackmail her or something of the sort. They held him there for a few minutes waiting for campus police, but they still didn't show up. I finally told him to get on the elevator and to stay away from the girl, and that I'd beat the crap out of him if I saw him doing that again. He scrammed, went outside and saw my friend waiting. He said the front desk at the library wasn't willing to call the campus police, and when they finally relented and called, they said they would send a unit out. We waited about an hour and nobody showed up. Story 3. I had a friend with primary progressive multiple sclerosis. He got sick early too, only 35. As it progressed to the point that he started relying on a cane, and some days a walker, to get around, you can imagine how he changed. I say this not as an excuse for what he did, but so you can understand how anger and depression can make a person behave differently than they had before. By this time, he was not the same man I befriended. I still cared for him and wished him well, but we stopped hanging out after that because his attitude was too horrible. One evening, we're sitting around in a bowling alley bar. My friend's girlfriend is setting up a karaoke show, and the sun hasn't even gone down yet. It's 8:30 at night. 3 guys come in and hassle her about wanting to sing now. She tells them it won't start for an hour. They hassle her some more, then wander off. They bowl, the place starts to gain some customers, and the lights in the bar get turned on to balance out cosmic bowling. Then these 3 guys wander back in at about 10. They want to sing. They get mad when she doesn't remember the songs they shouted at her earlier while screwing with their microphones. They get mad again when they're told they have to fill out the little slips and wait their turn like everybody else. They get mad a third time when she won't take $5 to let them go next. By now, our entire group of friends was there and celebrating a birthday. We're not cool. The guys wander away again, then almost get skipped over before showing up to do their turn half an hour later. As they pick up the mics, they shout, "We better get 2 songs for making us wait too," into them, causing feedback and a lot of angry people. She tells them, 1 song, everybody gets a chance to sing. It devolves into a full-blown argument between them. My friend, who's having a walker day, gets up to go defend his girlfriend, and in the middle of the shouting, the whole room distinctly hears my friend say, "And if a bunch of N-words think they can intimidate my girlfriend?" He trails off as he realizes that the entire bar, and indeed a big chunk of the bowling alley, have gone silent. These guys aren't about to, and shouldn't, take that shit. But it didn't have to go down the way it did. All of a sudden, he's trying to back away, with his walker, from these 3 guys who are all twice his size while he apologizes. They're screaming at him about how he's a crippled cracker, and they're going to make sure he needs a wheelchair if he lives through this, and his girlfriend can use the walker after they break her legs too. Too far. They didn't have to accept the apology, and if one of them had just punched him, I'd have said that's fair and he deserved it. But we couldn't let them do what they were threatening. Next thing I know, 2 of our friends and I stood up and I shouted, "That's enough!" The next thing I know, they're in our faces. One of my friends is just trying to negotiate our way out of it. The other is making threats. I'm just standing there trying not to lose my game face because I'm terrified as fuck of this 350+ pound, 6'6" mountain of a person who's picked me to square up with. I manage to duck under the punch he throws at me and somehow end up behind him. Desperately, I somehow end up with this guy in a full Nelson, except I'm 145 pounds and 5'8". At this point, I'm this guy's new cape. He starts swinging around wildly, screaming, "Get him off! Get him off!" The entire room has gone from fear and aggression to amusement. I hear people start to laugh. One of his buddies grabs me by the back of the shirt and shoves me away. I stumble, trip over something, and break my nose in the corner of a table. I can't even claim a decent taken punch to the face. The Mountain walks over to me. I'm now laying on the ground with blood gushing out of my face. He leans right down over me and shouts, "Stay down! Then he looks at me for a second, points a finger in my face and says, "I get it. Gotta stand up for your boy. What you really gotta do is pick better boys or educate yours." Then the wave finger turns into an extended hand and helps me to my feet. Bartender grabs me a rag and we all get kicked out together. When the cops showed up and found us all, except Loudmouth, sitting outside congenially, they agreed to let us all go our way and drive me to the hospital, if we all agreed to drop the matter. My friend wanted charges pressed against all three and was threatening to sue the bar too. He backed down when I told him I'd break his nose to match mine if he did anything of the sort. It was the scariest moment of my entire life, and the only reason I lived was that the mountain showed me mercy. This freak wanted to bankrupt me in lawyer fees after that. That was 11 years ago. I only saw my friend twice after that, once at a bar and once at his funeral. I miss the man he was before multiple sclerosis. I don't miss the angry, depressed man he became. Story 4. Happened yesterday. I wasn't particularly terrified, but a bit uneasy. I go grocery shopping at the same store at the same time, maybe twice a week. Dare works as a grocery bagger, and once before he waited by my car to help me put groceries in my trunk. It threw me off and made me uncomfortable. I get anxious in social situations, but figured he was just being polite and doing his job. I'm a really shy person. My instinct is to be polite no matter how uncomfortable I am. Plus, and I don't mean this in a rude way, from our first encounter, I get the sense that he's not all there in the head. So yesterday I went straight from the store to my car, opened my trunk, and promptly started putting my groceries in. Out of nowhere, this guy appears, and we engage in polite chit-chat. He asks how I'm doing, and I reply, but make the mistake of asking how he is. There he goes off on a rant of how this whole year has been awful, how he dreams of killing this dog, not sure if it was his dog or another. He lost me in the rant, and also how watching people hang is entertaining. He's getting pretty passionate in this rant and escalating to how it's hypocritical how the justice system treats murder and rape, and how it's allowed for Americans to do so in other countries when fighting a war. Note, so that it's relevant to the question, that it's broad daylight. There are several people in the parking lot. I'm an idiot, so I'm just standing there politely, and unfortunately, he's standing near the driver's side of my car. Eventually, after a nearly 15-minute rant of murder, hanging, and heads, I wiggle past him and tell him to take it easy. I'll probably just find another supermarket. I think I'm going to call the store directly and report to the manager what he said to me. I'm not sure if this warrants a police report or not. I called the store after work today. I let the store manager know exactly what he said to me, that it made me uncomfortable, and I don't believe I'll be returning anytime soon, if at all. Without mentioning his name because I didn't know it, the manager seemed aware of who I was talking about. She says he lives with his grandmother due to his disability, did not elaborate, who she knew personally. She also stated he did not have a pet dog, after I expressed concern that he could potentially harm an innocent animal, and she would speak to the grandmother about him. The manager also stated there have been no other complaints before about him, and he worked there for a while. To be honest, it seems like she was sort of brushing the whole situation aside, because she asked me if I told him that he was making me uncomfortable. Now, this may just be my opinion, but anytime a stranger in close proximity to me talks about justifying murder and rape makes me a wee bit uncomfortable. I don't know, maybe I'm too sensitive. However, she wrapped up the call by saying she was sorry about this experience and the situation would be handled accordingly. Story 5. I used to take those classes at a Catholic church in the evening. I was put ahead into an older kid class. I believe I was 8, and most of them were pre-teens or early teens. This one guy, 14 or 15, kept offering me money for a blowjob, which at the time I had no idea what it was. A bunch of the other girls would always swarm me when he was nearby and tell me to ignore him, not take the money, etc. He was known as a troublemaker. I asked my parents what a blowjob was, and they found out and made a complaint. His family gave a lot of money to that church, so nothing happened to him. Then I got to the church early and was just roaming around. He was there and got physical with me. I didn't really understand at the time, but now I realize he was likely trying to rape me. I called out for others to help, but absolutely no one did. A few adults would stop and watch, but then they'd keep walking. Thankfully, my older sister ran into us and put a stop to everything, so ultimately nothing happened. He got kicked out after that. I understand not getting involved, but no one even called the cops. Story 6. On the 3rd of this month, in a very well-lit hospital room, my hospitalist came to my bedside after 9 days in the hospital to tell me a blood smear and flow cytometry pointed to me having a T-cell non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, that I needed a bone marrow biopsy to confirm. The oncologist came to visit my room to tell me my spleen was also enlarged, and in her best opinion, I had likely a stage 4, if the bone marrow came back as she thought it would, T-cell lymphoma, that I would start chemo the day after the results came back, that it would be 2 rounds of that therapy, and if I did not respond, they would get ready for a bone marrow transplant, asked me if I had siblings. She said the type she thinks I have is very aggressive, as it did not show in my lymph nodes but was already showing symptoms in my spleen and liver. Apparently, this is very bad. I have 3 children, 11, 9, and 7. I love them dearly and could not stop thinking about them. It put so many things into perspective for me. I cried. My family cried. I became extremely negative. On the day of the 9th, the oncologist came into my room. They had some bone marrow results. It all came out quickly. She was now saying the cells looked to be reactive to an atypical infection in the pathologist's sonoclonal cells. She said there was still a PCR pending that would rule out up to 99% that I was safe, but sent me home. I'm now waiting for my appointment, Tuesday, for the all clear. I'm very, very fatigued. I contracted C. diff falling due to heavy antibiotic use. I'm very, very, very tired. My anxiety is through the roof every second. I can't stop researching cancer. I'm scared to live. I'm just so scared. For now, I'm in the clear. The test was scrubbed and needed to be redone, which is in the process already, but my oncologist is now very confident that my results align with an atypical viral infection and that I should be totally helpful. Thank you. Story 7. When I was living in Paris, I was attacked in the Bastille metro station during the early evening, while in a group of 5 to 6 girls. This guy followed us off the train and onto an escalator and placed himself right behind my friend. She went around me farther up the escalator to get away from him. He tried to follow her. Being fluent in French, I put my arm out to block him and told him to leave her alone. He then grabbed my arm so hard that I later had fingerprint bruises, and then he just stared at me. It was terrifying. I was telling him to get off and leave me alone, all while trying to pry his fingers off me. There was just no emotion or reaction on his face. Luckily then, my friend just above me turns and sees this, and full-on falcon kicks this guy right in the chest. He fell back a bit, but caught himself, then grabbed her by the ponytail and punched her in the face. By this point, we're finally at the top of the escalator. Yes, this all transpired in the duration of an escalator ride, and a group of men chased the guy off. I love you, Paris, but hell did the men there harass the crap out of me. I should also add that while I was thankful that this group of men chased him off, they also then started yelling at us, saying we must have provoked him and that we shouldn't talk to men like him, and next time just to call the police. To which I just yelled, "Where the hell are the police now?" Needless to say, our going out plans were thwarted and we went home. On the way home that night, I got my ass grabbed twice and one guy flashed me right outside my house. Now that one, he got punched in the face. Story 8. I was standing on a bus during London's morning rush. It was an absolute crush, nowhere to move. I felt a bus press into the back of me, so I shouted for the driver to stop the bus. He promptly ignored me. I had absolutely nowhere to go. I was trapped. And then this man reached under my skirt and tried to stick his fingers up my vagina. So I kept shouting about what was happening. Nobody on the bus did anything. The driver wouldn't stop, so I struggled with this man who, by that time, was holding me by my crotch and licking me. So at the next stop, Warren Street, the doors opened and I ran. This man chased me until he caught me and put me in a bear hug and kept telling me he was going to rape me then and there in broad daylight. I threatened to stab him in the eye with my keys in my hand and pressing into his eye, and he backed off. I kept shouting for people to call the police. I didn't have a mobile at that time, and people just kept walking past. So I ran to work. The police thankfully took me very seriously. They said that the CCTV systems on the bus weren't working at the time, so it would be difficult to identify my assailant. A week later, the same bus was bombed on 7/7. I wasn't on it because I was terrified that some man would do this again. That certainly isn't to say that it would have been on that exact bus at the exact same time it was blown up. But I also know that the CCTV wasn't working, making it harder for the police to identify the bomber. It was the absolute helplessness I felt, whereby every person around me watched but didn't do anything. Hundreds of people, passers-by, the bus driver, and my fellow passengers on the bus all pretending that it wasn't happening. The terror of what happened in that instant didn't stick around, thankfully, but the mistrust of the bystander effect keeps me on my guard 11 years later. It also means that whenever I see people in trouble, I make a point of helping instead of standing idly by. I will not allow anything like this to happen to anybody else. It has gotten me into sticky situations, but I don't want another person to feel the helplessness that I did. Story 9. It was well lit and populated, as it was my workplace. I was a pourer in a foundry at the time. Due to a mistake in the metal, it had to be put back into the furnace instead of being poured. A job that is done by using a crane to take the ladle, big bucket full of molten metal, back to the furnace. The ladle is then manually rolled over and the metal is poured back into the furnace. I was the lucky guy to roll it in. And whilst rolling it, the crane driver made a mistake and moved the ladle out of position. This resulted in a wave of 1,600 Celsius, or 3,000 Fahrenheit, metal flying toward me like water off a spoon in the sink. Due to the light coming from the molten metal, Couldn't gauge the depth of the wave at the time, but looked down to see nothing but orange light surrounding me from the waist up. This lasted a moment at most, but at that moment, every possible injury that could come from that crossed my mind. No injury came of that. Like a spoon in the sink, the wave was very thin and my gear was good enough, but I was genuinely terrified then. The wave of metal that hit me splashed back off the top rim of the furnace. I was on a stand, and about half of my body was above the rim of the furnace. When rolling the metal in, it comes out of the top of the bucket, and the crane operator managed to clip the furnace ventilation. This turned the ladle and caused it to go everywhere. What hit me was more like a sheet of metal that happened to be molten. Seeing it hit me, I was unable to tell how deep the actual wave was. So from my perspective, I had a sheet of molten metal around my waist that was unknown depth and incredibly hot. As I was the one turning the ladle in, I flicked down the lock on the turning wheel and quickly turned to jump down from the stand. This all happened very quickly. There was a distinct line and some metal splash in the front of my jacket where the wave had come into contact with me. Once I determined I was okay, I put the gear back on and finished the rollover. Story 10. When I was 12 years old, I was beaten up in a crowded bus station at rush hour by a boy several years older than me, for absolutely no reason whatsoever. It was a completely unprovoked attack, and I was trapped against a one-way door. The adults standing around waiting for their buses to go home from work did absolutely nothing to help me, or to stop me from being attacked.
Serious travelers of Reddit, what are some of the creepiest, scariest experiences you've had abroad? Story 1. Gandalf saved my life and got a copy of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance for his trouble. I was walking around in a town in Algeria. I wandered into a neighborhood and noticed there were hardly any people out. A little further, and there were literally no people out. I started to feel a little uneasy, and then I see an extremely tall man walking towards me, straight towards me, obviously with intent. He gets closer, and I see an older gentleman with a long grey beard and wearing a grey tunic. I stop. He comes right up to me and says in pretty good English, "You're not safe here, we need to get you off the street." I say, "Okay." And he says, "Follow me." We walk a few blocks and we come to a door. He says, "Wait here a minute," and he goes inside. He opens the door again and invites me in. When I get inside, there are maybe a dozen men. They're all dressed in black, and they are staring absolute daggers at me. Greybeard lays into them, starts shaking his fists at them, gets really worked up. Then one of the younger guys goes into the kitchen and brings out some tea and cookies and offers them to me. So I'm drinking tea and trying to smile, and one of the young guys asks where I'm from, and I say, "The States," and he starts talking about the CIA and stuff. And then I say, "You think the CIA is bad here? Let me tell you about Central America." And then pretty soon everybody is warming up to me and we're laughing and talking crap about American foreign policy and drinking tea. After a bit of that, the older man invites me back to his apartment. He has a huge library. I gift him a book that I had finished, and then he tells me what had just happened. His little brother, who was one of the younger men, was the leader of a radical group, all the other men I had met. He had overheard them getting ready to kidnap me, but he had shamed them for not being good hosts and for disrespecting him because it was his house. He said that I would be safe from then on. Story 2. Ended up in an Airbnb in a bad part of Chicago where 3 housemates were mugged and 2 people on the street were shot. Didn't stay another night. Visiting Chicago from Seattle for a week, I booked an Airbnb with a gentleman understanding that I would be in a household with maybe 5 other people as he did bunk beds in the room. The Airbnb was marketed as close to trains in a decent area, and the house looked clean with many useful amenities. Upon arriving at the house, I find that it's run down and unclean, with only the sheets being changed by the maid. On top of that, many appliances were broken and there was no potable water. That was the first strike. Next, there were upwards of 15 people staying in the house. That bunk bed situation, he had 5 to 6 rooms with varying amounts of bunk beds squeezed in and no room to walk. No one in the house knew about the other rooms from the listing. I dropped my things off to explore the city and noticed the neighborhood was a bit sketchy but thought nothing of it. When I came back, there was one of the other guests sitting waiting for an Uber Eats because he was too terrified to walk down the street and get food. Apparently, the night before I arrived, 3 people in the house were mugged while walking 5 minutes from the train to the house. That night, 8 of us sat on the floor of the living room, which seemed like a small dining area, but a lover's couch was placed in there with a broken TV, and heard 2 separate occasions of 8 to 10 gunshots a block away. I immediately moved to a hostel and argued with Airbnb and himself until I received a refund. Mike, screw you. Story 3. A guy in Aruba tried to kidnap and rape me, I think. I'm a single female and found a crazy cheap ticket out there. Decided to use it as a chance to get my advanced diver certificate. Anyway, I went on a horse riding trip where the tour picked up a group in a minivan. On the way back, the driver skipped my stop and dropped off the last riders at their hotel. After a moment of confusion, I was unsure of my surroundings but felt like this was wrong. I asked why we drove past my place. The driver said, "Oh, I'm taking a different way." And I said, "That really doesn't make sense. The traffic is fine. It's more direct this way. Can we just go back?" He was quiet and kept driving, and now my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He said, "There's a really great beach down this way, not many tourists." At this point, he was driving through the backside of a shopping complex, nobody in sight, dusk, and I was considering if I should try to jump out of a moving vehicle, but because I'd get stranded in an empty parking lot, it'd be all too easy for him to grab me again. Instead, I said, "I can't. There are people waiting for me. I just texted them saying I'm in the car on the way home and will be there in a few minutes. I'll be late if we don't go back now." Somehow that worked. He turned the car around and his whole attitude changed. He started telling me how he had a wife and kids. My heart was thundering, but I think I sounded normal. Also, I had zero cell phone reception. The story about the text was a lie, and I had no way to phone for help if he called my bluff. Freaking scary. If that crap happens on a tour when you go in a decent-sized group, I have no idea how you stay safe as a single female traveler. Story 4. This is a story of how to make every mistake possible and put yourself in way too much danger. I was in Boquete, Panama with a friend. The first night there, we went out drinking with a group of people. Me and a girl separated ourselves for some private time. Being drunk and silly, we were in the middle of the road. After a while, we decided to walk to a gas station to get cigarettes. It's a weird town, and the gas stations are on the outskirts. I'm inside, drunkenly fluctuating between Spanish, French, and English with the two attendants. A girl comes in and tells me that she has found us a ride back to her hostel. I pull myself into a white Escalade. Mistake 1. The only people who drive Escalades in Panama are not the people whose Escalade you ever want to find yourself in. And I look at the driver. Imagine your cliché out 40-year-old former trophy wife. That is our driver. She's drunk as hell as well. Mistake 2. Getting into a drunk foreigner's car. After some driving around, it becomes obvious that the woman is freaking mental. She's doing while driving, respect where it's due, she didn't spill, and weeping constantly. Me and my gal pal are a little put off, and asked to be let out. The driver pulls over and gal pal, who is sitting in the front, jumps out. I'm just about to follow suit when the driver turns to me and says, "I lost my kids today, stay with me for a minute." This was 5 years ago, and I have grown up a lot since then. But drunk me decided that I was making a great decision by staying in the car. I'm on the edge of a blackout in a brand new town, and so, for a while, I don't notice that this drunk woman is driving me out of town. She makes a phone call and then a few minutes later pulls the car to the side of the road. I'm not joking when I say the largest man I have ever seen gets into the back of the car. He's Panamanian and thugged out from head to toe. He has dead eyes and coldly stares at me without saying a word. My drunk white Canadian self is sitting in the front seat. Through the liquor haze, my brain is screaming, "Dude, you're in Panama. No one knows where you are. You're alone with this terrifying human who hasn't spoken a word and a clearly messed up trophy wife cuckhead." So I pull out my phone, thinking now is a good time to get a hold of my buddy back at our hostel. Freaking dead. My phone is dead. Mistake 3, never ever go anywhere without having a method of at least getting into contact with the outside world. So we are driving further and further out of town. The houses are getting big and spread out. We pull into a house that has Greek columns in the entranceway, and I'm thinking to myself that I've been kidnapped. Walk into the house, and there sitting at the table is an American dude with a facial scar going from above his right eye down to his lip. It's the angry kind of scar that jumps out at you. The woman who brought me out says she needs to deal with some stuff and leaves me at a table with the Panamanian and the American. I'm thanking God that despite this man's supervillain scar, I finally have a person I can clearly communicate with. The guy immediately starts yelling at me and cursing me out. He drags my ass outside with the Panamanian and starts telling me that this isn't the woman's house and that they aren't here friends. This is her ex-husband's house. He's convinced that she brought me here to hook up with me in her ex's house. I quickly explain the weirdness of the evening. The American calms down and eventually we get settled and start chatting and drinking a bit. I'm in damage control mode and want the American to like me, so I'm drinking and smoking weed and generally trying to be a fun dude. The American gets trashed and starts telling me crap he should not be telling anyone. Tells me that he is a drug runner, places a 1 kilogram bag of on the table to prove it, then pulls a handgun out of his waistband to put an exclamation point on the statement. I'm crapping bricks on the inside, but on the outside I'm all, "Oh, hey, cool." American starts to tell me about his time in prison, and tells me that he got his scar in prison, kindly offers to cut my face in a similar way to make a man out of me. I kindly declined whilst thinking I was legit, about to get carved up by a crazy American and Panamanian. At this point, the Panamanian woman comes back out and tells me she needs to talk. We go outside for a cigarette, and she says the following. Her, I know what you are. Me. Oh, her, you're an angel. You're an angel who has been sent here to help me kill myself and take me to the other side. Me. What? Her, come with me, let's go for a drive, just you and me. Me. No, thanks. Her, take me to the other side. Me. Haha, yeah, right, brabba lol, chikakai. I run inside to the American and told him what just happened. He offers to drive me home. I say hell yes, but don't let the f***ing Panamanian woman drive. So, yeah, just about messed up in every way possible. Saw the American on the street a few days later and he waved like we were bras. I noped the hell out of there. Story 5. I was in Barbados walking on a main road back to where I was sleeping, not far from the main beach on the south side. It was late and dark. I came across this man carrying a white bucket. Hi, I'm Bush. Bush has plants in the bucket. He also has a machete. Do you have any food for me, some rice? I tell him I do not have any food, but that I do have that I could share. I had bought some from a bunch of kids at the beach the night before. Follow me, says Bush. So I follow this man with a machete off the road into an empty lot. At the back of the lot is a back alley heading to the side. We take this alley. A man is sitting, sleeping on a wall, and a few broken down cars are parked. It is a dead end. I was wondering earlier whether all this was a good idea, and my mind was beginning to form an opinion along the lines of no. So we get to the end of the alley. He enters a door and brings out 2 chairs. Turns out this is his mum's place. I begin to notice a small garden all around, made from the plants that Bush picks up and brings back in his bucket. We light up. He tokes first. He coughs. Ugh, this stuff is crap. You feed this to the sheep. Story 6. Held up at machete point, then almost trafficked in Morocco during my first international travel experience. I was walking to a pharmacy down a busy avenue in Rabat, Morocco. It was the feast of the king, so most people had off work and school, meaning the avenue was empty. Myself and 2 volunteers, all 3 young white females, are walking and chatting when 2 guys on a motorbike pass us the opposite way. They drove over the median and pulled up beside us. The guy on the back gets off and walks toward us, then pulls a machete out from underneath his flannel. Girl 1 throws her purse. Girl 2 throws her phone, and both go running. The guy comes after me and I wrap my hand around my purse, which had my passport, wallet, phone, etc., and he holds the machete up to my neck. I said a few choice words to him in Arabic, essentially, shame on you by Allah, which is something I was taught by locals to keep the kids I was working with at an orphanage in line. Machete Man promptly appears to crap his pants. He goes after the dropped phone and purse, and I start running the rest of the way to the pharmacy. I wind up there crying, and the other 2 girls meet me. People are starting to congregate. Some witnessed it while driving by, while others were trying to translate for us. A woman says she will drive us home after speaking with the security guard at the pharmacy. We agree and get into a minivan. I provide directions in Arabic and the woman drives right past the house, blowing stop signs and ignoring traffic lights. It's then we realize we're about to get kidnapped. One of the 2 girls reached forward, opened the door of the van, and we jumped out while it was moving. Story 7. Probably not the worst or most scarring incident, but still spooky nonetheless. Me and my best friend went on a Caribbean cruise a couple of years ago. Well, my best friend brings no cash, so I'm left paying for everything on the island since not many of the little local shops take cards. We get off in Jamaica and decide to take a bus over to Doctor's Cave Beach, a private beach you have to pay to access. Well, dumb me didn't bring more than $50 off the boat in cash, since I mixed up which pocket I was supposed to pull money out of. I bought a bag at the port, $16, and the bus ride was like $15 each, so I didn't have enough money to get us off the bus that took us to the beach. Some kind stranger loaned us $5, but that meant I needed cash to pay these people back. We stop by an ATM to pull out money, which doesn't work. Next to us is a lady on her cell phone, and we ask her where the nearest ATM is. She tells us it's at the airport, which is a good walk. But then she tells us she can get us cash if we just follow her. She owns a shop and we could use a credit card to pay her $40 worth of credit. And she would just give us the cash back so we could continue on our merry way. Simple, yes? I'm wary, but my best friend is trusting to a fault, so we follow her. She leads us to a tiny marketplace out of the way of any touristy-looking anything, which was a little worrying. There are people milling about watching us very carefully, not subtly at all staring at us as lost tourists. Very obviously an area impacted by extreme poverty, with lots of trash in the streets. After a while, I can barely hear the street traffic. We get to her shop, a tiny hole in the way packed ceiling to floor with touristy trinkets, and a friend of hers had followed us from the main road, beckoning us to come to her shop as well. We said thanks, but no thanks, rebuffing multiple requests. We milled around in this shop a bit while the shopkeeper found her card reader, and while she looked, she gently suggested things to us. Did we want a keychain perhaps? A queen conch shell? The implication is, I'm helping you out, so you should buy something. So we bought a few keychains. While we were looking, a man comes into the store and wraps a bracelet around my wrist, saying how beautiful it looked. The shopkeeper took one look at him and went, "That's not free. He wants you to pay for that," in a cold voice. He quickly took the bracelet off and took off. We spent maybe 10 minutes altogether in the shop, and about 3 different times people came in and told us we should come to see their shop when we were done. She escorted us back to the main road, people beckoning us into tiny bedroom-sized shops in this back alley marketplace the entire time, and back to the entrance of the private beach. She quickly went back to the spot we first found her in, and only after I got home and thought about this situation did I realize she probably stands there on purpose, waiting for hapless tourists to try and use the broken ATM machine to offer to help them out. My best friend also told me afterwards, since I couldn't hear their conversation over the traffic on the main road, this woman told him she was the queen of that particular marketplace. Cool beans probably helped keep a majority of the people from hassling us any more than they did, and also possibly getting mugged. She really did help us out a lot though, and I'm forever grateful to the Jamaican marketplace queen. One of the most memorable moments of the trip, honestly. Oh, also a few minutes before all this happened, a guy walked up and tried to sell us what I think was black tar heroin, so that just added to the skewness of the entire experience. I had to tell him I got drug tested at work for him to leave us alone. Fun times. Story 8. I was traveling in Nicaragua several years ago when I got lost and ended up having to take a taxi at 9:30 p.m. back to my hostel. When the taxi pulled up to the curb, the taxi driver locked the taxi doors and told me that I had misunderstood the fare. He claimed I owed him $100, which was several times more than we had agreed upon. I tried to pry the doors open from the inside, but was completely trapped. Thankfully, he let me out of the taxi after taking all the money I had on me. The hostel workers told me I was incredibly lucky. A few days earlier, a taxi driver had kidnapped another young female, assaulted her, then dumped her barely conscious body in a field outside town thinking that she was dead. A few local school children found her on their way to school in the morning. Story 9. Hiking in Huaraz, Peru, have been told to watch our gear as locals, and apparently foxes, might make off with items left around the campsite. So we made sure to clean the campsite extra well, packing all our gear in the tent and inside the fly, and after a long day hiking off to bed, middle of the night our tent started shaking like crazy. I woke up freaking out thinking we were getting robbed, and I started yelling and screaming. Part of the tent pushes in really far. I managed to get outside to start swinging and came face to face with the cow that had wandered into the tent ropes and got startled. Pretty lucky that it didn't step down into the tent and hit us. Story 10. When I was a kid, my dad used to lead groups of college kids to Central and South America to build houses. One year, he decided that we should ride the chicken from Guatemala City to Mexico City. Long trip. We got to the border and a soldier with a hell of a big machine gun got on the bus and looked around, saw that we had about 15 college girls on the bus, and then went and talked to someone on the phone. About 2 minutes later, a bunch of guys with machine guns got on the bus and informed us that all the males had to get off the bus and line up in front of it. I remember that we did it, but there was a hell of a lot of tension in the air as we did. Soldiers crammed into the bus. We waited. Finally, they got off the bus, and we got back on, and away we went. It was a whole lot of nothing, really, but I remember my dad, the leader of the group, looking very pale and sweating bullets. Story 11. I was stalked by a guy while walking through the Tiergarten in Berlin. I was walking along a path, enjoying the park alone. I saw this guy standing on the edge of the walkway just looking off into the distance. I passed him, and when I was about 20 feet away, he turned and followed after me, keeping pace. I started to take a very meandering path, even leaving the park and entering again. The guy stuck with me the whole way. Eventually, I got to a place with some sharp turns and heavy greenery. I was able to lose the line of sight and put myself up against a corner. I'd just been in Switzerland and had bought a pocket knife, so I opened the blade and held it inside my jacket pocket. I stood there, waiting, and then this guy comes walking out of the path, confused, and obviously trying to see where I went. When he finally spotted me, he jolted, and since I had the drop on him, he played it cool and continued walking as if he hadn't followed me there. He stopped a little ways ahead, and I kept watching him. I wanted to confront him to find out why he'd followed me. But since I was a visitor in the country, I thought better of it. Instead, I waited until I saw a big group of people leaving and fell in with them. He started to follow me, but I finally lost him outside the garden. It unsettled me because to this day I have no idea why he was following me. I'm a guy, and at the time I was in my early 20s, pretty fit and had a sour disposition, so I didn't seem like a prime mugging target. But maybe he thought otherwise. Story 12. I witnessed a creepy old man grabbing a teenager on a crowded train in Osaka. The girl was just enduring it, and you can tell that she was holding back her tears. I whipped my phone out and started filming the guy, which made him use his other hand, which was blocked from my view, so I asked my guy friend to switch places with the girl. After that, at the next stop, the creepy guy got off. I asked the girl if she was okay. She thanked us, and her friends also expressed their gratitude. I think all of them, all teenage girls, were aware of the grouping, but I read somewhere that it is not the Japanese culture to make a scene. I was aware that this kind of thing was prevalent in Japan, but I'm still shocked to see it in person. That creepy man and the poor girl's face will be forever etched in my mind.
What was a moment in your life that felt like a horror movie scene? I went on a really deep woods hike for only the second time in my life. My GPS broke and I had to rely on my compass. I got turned around a few times because I couldn't remember the direction I came from, and it was getting dark. I lost the trail. The woods are weirdly silent when you're alone in the dark. It was around 2 a.m. by the time I found the trailhead. Story 2. I was a baby in a car seat between my cousins in the back seat. My dad was driving. This was in the 80s, and it was my aunt's insistence that I be in the seat, even though I was like 5. A sleeping semi-truck driver was coming into our lane, and there was a cliff on the other side. My dad did some amazing driving, but the semi still hit us. I was uninjured, sitting in the seat and swinging my legs while everyone else was unconscious. They all woke up groaning. My dad didn't wake up. Long story short, everyone had only minor scrapes, and my dad had a broken leg. But the crunch of metal in those few seconds or minutes of being the only alive person were quite fear-inducing. Story 3. 2 days after my now boyfriend told me he liked me, he fell from a zipline and broke his back. He almost passed away. 6 months later, he was in a car wreck caused by an intoxicated driver and almost passed away again. 6 months after that, he passed out and had to have emergency brain surgery, where he again almost passed away. I now have severe anxiety, separation anxiety, and PTSD. That whole year was a nightmare. We're both okay now. The brain injury was almost a year ago, but TBIs take a while to heal, so he still has side effects. Thankfully, our relationship is still strong. He's physically getting better, and I'm healing emotionally, too. Luckily for him, the trauma of the injuries has caused him to forget the majority of the pain and memories of those incidents. Story 4. Driving home from work at 23, I was listening to my favorite song. I pulled up to a red light and saw a guy on a motorcycle coming up next to me in the other lane. I rolled down my window to compliment his bike when he stopped. He didn't, and ran the red light. He hit a car going at least 55 miles per hour. His motorcycle shattered apart. He went flying, hit the hood of another car, and landed on the ground before rolling into the curb. He wasn't wearing a helmet. The car he hit with his motorcycle was totaled. I had to step over his body to talk to the police. He was still alive when they got there. I regret not holding his hand. It was just a normal day, and all of a sudden it felt like the rug was pulled out from under me. It was only 18. Story 5. My dad came home spiked off his butt. Not unusual, and when I wouldn't let him into my little brother's room to say goodnight, we got into it, which was also not unusual. He was trying to force his way past me, and he's at least 2 times my size on a good day, so I just tried to divert his attention to steer him away from my brothers. It wasn't hard to get him angry about something else, and he carried me more than dragged me outside. I was trying to get away, but just got slammed into the wall a few times for my trouble. In our neighborhood, nobody's going to call the police on you, so he wasn't worried about taking it outside to avoid a little extra property damage. I don't remember what he was yelling about, and I don't really care. I was kicking as much as I could and got in a couple of good shots, but he just put more of his weight on me. My older brother, who was 18 at the time, got home from work maybe a few minutes into the fight. He usually got back just before my father did, and the two of us were almost always able to de-escalate him without too much trouble. I remember him coming down the street basically just barreling into my dad to tackle him off me. My brother is a pretty wiry guy, but he has some muscle on him and is a much better match for our father. My dad pulled his gun and I panicked and tried to take him down from behind. I broke a bottle over his head and we were both trying to wrestle him down. Got a couple of shots off, which caught my brother off guard enough to get the upper hand. I stomped on his forearm hard enough to get the gun out of play. I don't even remember who was hurt and how at that point. I can piece things together looking back, but all I remember is a heck of a lot of adrenaline. I'm not even sure I was really scared. I know some of our neighbors were out on their porches watching. That's how people tend to react to this sort of thing here. Between my brother and I, we got our dad out cold after a couple of good hits of his head on the asphalt, but we got at least as good as we gave. This is where things start getting really hazy, and I'm not quite sure how conscious I was or how much I don't remember.
My brother would be next to me, and I'd blink and he'd be gone, and I couldn't really hear anything except myself breathing, like I was underwater or something. In the years since, my brother has filled me in somewhat on the details, so as far as I can piece things together, this is what happened. My brother checked to make sure Dad was really unconscious and that I was vaguely coherent. Then he ran inside and told our little brother to hide and not leave their room no matter what. When he came back outside, he said he knew he had to call the police. This was the worst fight the three of us had ever gone into, and it was the first time my brother and I couldn't just stitch each other up and be okay. I was and am still a minor, and he knew CPS would get involved if the police knew my father had hurt me. My brother and I have always worked hard to avoid CPS intervention and the high risk of being separated from our little brothers and each other. My brother got me up, slid me into the driver's side of my dad's car, and told me to step on the gas and keep going until I crashed. I don't remember this, but apparently the message got through. I think I hit someone else's car pretty hard as they came down the street in the other direction. My brother called 911 and reported the car accident and that he and my dad had gone into a bad physical fight. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. I nearly passed away, and from the fact that my brother still won't tell me his own injuries, I assume he was about as close. They wouldn't let me see my brother or father, and I thought they were gone. I learned later that they'd both been arrested. Both were eventually convicted and sentenced. The night we were fighting was the last time I touched my brother. I wish I'd hugged him. Story 6. My 18th birthday was a horror movie. To explain, my biological father essayed me. He was arrested, and I moved with my older brother and mother. During court, he walked in with a Bible. He was told that he could not contact me or my brother at any time until one of us turned 18. He received some amount of jail time, and I never heard from him until my brother's 18th birthday. My brother received a friend request on Facebook from my biological dad because he was out of jail and wanted a second chance. My brother blocked him. I dreaded the thought of my biological dad contacting me on my 18th birthday. On my birthday, I sat in front of my phone, waiting for a phone call or a friend request, anything I didn't recognize. 12 hours went by and nothing. I've never felt so much relief in my entire life. It's now 2021 and I haven't gotten a single call or friend request. Story 7. I was about 8 years old at the time, and it was something like 1 or 2 in the morning. I went to the bathroom and it was quite bright outside despite the time. I was sitting on the toilet, playing with the current. I came up enough and saw a shadow standing outside the window. I screamed and my mom came running. I told her there was someone standing outside the bathroom window. Now, my mom, being the crazy person she is, threw open the curtain and opened the window, ready to fight a person. Guy outside the window? Nope, a freaking bear. The window was probably shut and I was quickly ushered out of the bathroom. This event furthered the on and off talks my parents had been having about moving. On a side note, we moved about 2 years later for several other reasons. Funny enough, there is now a bear roaming this neighborhood. It has been spotted on my parents' front porch at least twice now. Story 8. My dad had just gone home from his second job as a cashier at the truck stop across the street from my house. He worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and had gone off at 3 a.m. Around 3:45 a.m., my mom called me into her room to look out the window and see what the flashing lights were about. Cops regularly stopped people there, so I didn't think much of it. I tried calling my dad to see what was going on this time, but there was no answer. I looked back out the front door toward the station and saw cops putting up caution tape. That had never happened for any stops there before. I told my mom I was leaving and got in my car to drive over. I parked to the side and ran to the back door, which was locked. I then ran around to the front where a crowd of people and cops were standing outside the tape. My dad was not one of those people. I asked what had happened, and they told me that there had been a robbery and the cashier had been fired at. I told them the cashier was my dad. I wasn't allowed to go in because it was still a crime scene. The police officer told me he had been combative when they got there, saying that he was fine and could get his wallet for his ID by himself. They rolled him out on the stretcher. I don't remember him talking. I think they may have sedated him or he was just unconscious. The EMTs asked which hospital we preferred and they left with him. Called my mom and told her to get dressed, that my dad had been shot and we were going to the hospital. We were at the hospital for the next day or so. The doctors attempted several surgeries to decrease the swelling in his brain from the gunshot, but it wasn't working. His eyes were swollen shut and purple from the pressure. Eventually, we were told that he likely would not have any brain function from all of the damage and was taken off life support. He, my mom, and I just bought a new house 28 days before this. He had been through so much with a move and my mom's health problems. We were basically homeless for a few weeks during the move. We were also happy to be in the new home instead of our old one that had been falling apart for years. That didn't last very long. I'm sorry if this isn't the kind of horror story you're looking for, but it's my horror story. Story 9. When I was about 13, I had to stay home alone every day after school. My parents worked. One day, there was a knock at the door. I didn't answer, obviously, because I was just a kid, and whoever it was started slowly trying to turn the locked doorknob. I called my mom after they left, and while I was on the phone with her, the back door started getting kicked down. As I was frantically trying to tell her I needed help, the phone call dropped, and I just had to run. For those wondering, we had an alarm system, so luckily when it started going off, it scared them off. I was luckily able to run to my neighbor's house for help, but we still, to this day, have no idea who it was. Story 10. I was maybe 10 years old and part of the choir at my local church. In the evenings, the church also acted as an amateur dramatics venue for various performances. One play involved having a choir, which was handy, as the church knew just how to get hold of some good extras. so I had to perform for the late evening showings. Because the main entrance meant walking past paying customers, I had to enter through the back door of the church, which was through the graveyard. It was like a freaking trope. Got a few meters into the graveyard and my crappy torch back then. This was in the days of rubbish filament bulbs that were delicate and sucked batteries dry fast. I immediately convinced myself something was creeping up behind me in the dark. Started running. Of course, I swore I could hear my stalker keeping pace. Panic. I was running full tilt through a pitch-black graveyard. Ran at full speed into a low, stone table-type grave. I hit both shins and then face planted hard into the top of the grave. Adrenaline is amazing. I didn't feel a thing. I got straight back up and ran in a full circle until it came out of the other side of the church and back into the street light. I stood there panting and realizing I needed to go back around to get to the door. I decided screw it and noped out, going home instead. The adrenaline wore off on the walk home, then it hurt. Story 11. When I was a kid, I spent a few years living on a property with my grandparents and great-grandparents. It was way up in the backcountry, down a dirt road, and one of the few old properties nestled in a national park. There was a real deliverance vibe to the place. We were fairly isolated, but we often had issues with feral dogs. Pig hunters would illegally hunt in the national park, and if their dogs got wounded, they'd just turn them loose in the park. The surviving dogs would form into feral packs, and they'd attack livestock. My grandpa's neighbor was a bit of a nutter. He used to sit at his fence and take potshots at strange cars that came too close to his gate. Aside from that, he was a real sweet old guy, and he was always nice to me. I used to ride my bike to the school bus stop, and on the way home, I'd always stop for a chat. I don't think I ever saw him without his old Lee Enfield rifle in his hand. Anyway, I was 12 and I'd picked up a part-time job at the bakery or cafe in town, just a few hours a week after school. But it meant that in the winter, I was sometimes riding home after it got dark and foggy. I was riding my bike home in the dark. I came around the corner and saw something hanging in the trees, lots of somethings lining the road. The old guy next door had spent a few weeks shooting every pig dog he could find, and then he'd hung the corpses in the trees along the road outside his property. It was scary as heck. Story 12. It was a dark and quiet morning when I came to volunteer at the library. Usually no one came around at that time. I signed in and went off to my newly assigned section. It was so dusty and messy, no one had probably been that deep into the library in a long time. I put on my music and did my work until suddenly I heard something. There was a man an aisle down who was looking at me. He was tall, with long, disheveled hair and dark, beady eyes. How long had he been standing there? I had started the shift maybe 10 minutes ago. I never felt such a feeling before, but I got the sense that he had ended someone before. I continued with my work and occasionally glanced at the man, who appeared to be getting closer each time I looked back at him. He continued to stare at me. I was so deep in the library I didn't think the security guard would hear me if I screamed. I was completely on my own. I finished my work and decided to quickly run around the corners for somewhere safe. I zigzagged around the shelves as much as possible. The best place I could find to hide was the bathroom. I locked it. I waited for the time when more patrons would come into the library. The man appeared to be gone. I spent the rest of my shifts at the library on edge. Story 13. My parents were once robbed at gunpoint while they were on the night shift at the clinic where they worked. My father was in the butt of the gun and my mom was chained to some furniture. Luckily, that was the worst of it, but it traumatized my mom so badly that she developed PTSD and started becoming paranoid of everyone and everything. She quit her job and would stay indoors all the time, locking every window and door. We lived in a plot surrounded by a stone fence where my father's side of the family lived, and we rented the apartment above their garage while our house was being built right next door. One night, after making sure everything was locked, we went inside for supper at around 8 p.m. when we started hearing someone screaming and knocking on the garage door like a madman. 5, 10, 15 minutes passed and they wouldn't give up. My mom was scared out of her wits for herself, but also for her kids. My older brother, me, and my little brother who was around 4 back then, as we were the only ones in at the time. The banging and screaming stopped for a minute, but then this crazy person started throwing stones over the fence and into our sliding doors, still hollering like a monkey in a fight. My mom couldn't take it anymore, so she instructed us to put on a jacket and go out into the house being built to hide. We went inside the construction site, barely able to see ahead because she was afraid to turn on a flashlight. She told us to tuck ourselves into a corner of the smallest room, a bathroom now, and grab hold of any steel poles just all laying around to defend ourselves. She then instructed my older brother to climb on her to see if there was anyone down the street. Her plan was to have us climb over the wall and go to a friend's house. My little brother and I were clutching these steel poles for dear life, and it was so quiet that we were able to hear my brother whisper that there was a man walking down the street towards us. Couldn't see who it was. So then my mom put him down, handed him another pole, and told us to keep real quiet. A few more minutes passed and we heard nothing. So my mom decided to take a peek herself, and as she was preparing to hoist herself up, the shadow of a man wearing a gabardine, swishing and spurting around him with a Batman effect, hurled himself over the wall where we were. A scream of sheer terror. I'll never forget that sound. It was pure luck that the shock of the shadowy man and my mom's scream made us freeze for a second, or my uncle would have been harmed by steel poles. It turns out that he had forgotten his own key and he couldn't get in, so instead of resorting to ringing the doorbell like any other sane person would, he started hurling himself against the door, screaming, throwing stones, and then climbing the fence of our adjacent house to get in. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he started shouting at us for locking the door when he hadn't arrived yet. None of us slept that night. My mom was a sobbing mess, and my dad was furious with my uncle for his behavior, and he refused to apologize until much later. He always had anger management issues. We moved into the countryside not a month after. Story 14. I was hanging out alone at home, listening to music in the living room. The house was a single-level ranch, and I was 20 at the time. My sister came home and noticed a man popping his head up and looking in the large living room window. She was a bit intoxicated, so I thought she was imagining it. Nevertheless, we decided to close and lock all the windows and sleep in the same bedroom. I went to the back bedroom at the other end of the house to lock the window and found it open, with the screen removed from its tracks, suggesting someone tried to get in from outside. The music I was listening to was loud, so I would not have heard someone enter and approach until they were upon me. I guess they heard my sister come home, came around to the front to look in the window, and then took off. Creeps me out to know this person might have watched me from the front window without my noticing and then proceeded to the back window to break in. I always wonder what would have happened if my sister didn't come home and she did. I don't think robbery was the intent if it was clear that I was in the house. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 15. One time we wanted to go out to eat, so we picked a little diner that we had never been to before. There was one car in the lot. We didn't really think much of it, so we went on in. When we entered, there was a key in the door. Nobody was in the building. All the lights were on and the fans were going. There were even pies in the display case to be sold. It was so creepy. We called out, but nobody was there. We quickly left. That happened probably in either 2008 or 2009, and to this day, I still want to know what happened there and why it was like that. Story 16. I was very pregnant and asleep when I started dreaming that mariachi music was blasting outside, and I realized it wasn't a dream, and I was angry. It was 3 a.m. Why the heck was some person blasting mariachi music? So I went outside to give that person a piece of my mind in my bathrobe. He was in the apartment driveway in a beaten-up, white, old minivan. I ran up to him and asked what his problem was when he turned to look at me. His eyes were out. I'd been held up at gunpoint. I grew up hanging out in sketchy neighborhoods, so I don't get scared. I ran back into my apartment and spent the next month terrified that he knew where I lived. That man's soul was evil. Story 17. My best friend and I went jet skiing one time with a girl we barely knew. I was uncomfortable with the whole situation. I was putting my life in the hands of a complete stranger, and I had a weird feeling about this person from the day I met her. Something just seemed off. My best friend, who was a very trusting person, insisted that we go so we could get to know this girl better. Being a good friend, I didn't want her going by herself. We skied out to an island so that we could go wave jumping in the open water. I went out wave jumping with this girl for about 15 minutes. The waves were incredibly rough, and I began to feel unsafe. After a close call with a large wave, I suggested we go back. Instead of leaving when we got back to the island, the girl proceeded to take my best friend out on the waves. They didn't come back. I sat on that island for 3 hours in turmoil until I was picked up by the police. The first 15 minutes after the girls left, I was okay. By 30 minutes, I was worried, and by 45 minutes, I was panicking. The only phone in the waterproof case was the girl's, and I didn't know her passcode. The police ended up calling me on her phone, and my heart sank to my stomach. The ski had tipped, and they had treaded water for an hour, then proceeded to almost drown in a riptide. The worst thing about the ordeal was that the girl knew how unsafe the conditions were and had been warned by multiple people not to go out in the water that day. Still get furious thinking about how I almost lost my best friend. Sitting helplessly on that island with no clue as to what happened, no phone access, and no sign of rescue was awful. Well, I felt like a horror movie during those hours. Story 18. I've written about this a couple of times before, but it's still one of my most memorable and horrifying experiences. We were having a family outing with my mom, aunts, uncles, and cousins at the beach. I was maybe 8, and my 6-year-old cousin wandered into the waves and was immediately pulled under. I did everything I could to get an adult's attention, but they all ignored me. I grabbed my boogie board and ran to the water. He was getting spun and flipped around underwater, but I was able to grab him and put him on the board as we both got pulled out by what turned out to be a riptide. He screamed and screamed as we were pulled further and further out, but nobody heard us. We were so far out that all the people on the beach looked like dots. After what seemed like an hour, probably only 30 minutes or so, I was getting tired and it was really hard to keep my cousin calm. I didn't want him to be scared, but I was getting desperate. Finally, what seemed to be out of nowhere, I noticed 2 men with long hair suddenly sprinting toward the water's edge with surfboards in hand. They both jumped on their boards and paddled out right for us. They snatched us up out of the water and put us on their boards. It was only when we were halfway back to shore that our families even noticed we were gone. That same cousin whom I saved took his own life a few months ago, and this memory is hitting in a whole different way now. Story 19. I was freediving in about 20 to 25 feet of water. We were 9 miles from shore, down at Hen and Chicken's Reef outside of Tavernier Key. We anchored about 100 feet from the reef. I was 16. I had an amazing, to me, underwater disposable camera, and I dived to the bottom, wait as long as I could for a good shot, take a picture or two, and go back up for air. Back then I could hold my breath for about 3 to 4 minutes if I did everything perfectly. I got a few pictures of sea turtles, grouper, an awesome eel, and a bunch of other stuff. So one time I went down and found a fish that looked like Dory from Finding Nemo. I was trying to time a camera click to one of her swimming pauses when she suddenly just bolted away into the reef. Guess I scared her. Thought for about 2 whole seconds. Everything had bolted for the reef. Even the eel I had gotten way too close to for a picture was hiding. Realizing this was the part in the movie where the shark rips the first person to shreds, I turned around nice and slow to discover that not 2 feet behind me was a 7-foot-long great barracuda with a body as big as one of my giant bicycling thighs. There were 4 more behind him, a bit further away, but he was just determined to see what I was doing at his reef. I stayed and turned around and slowly brought the camera up and took picture after picture, desperately hoping that at least one of them would come out as amazing as what I was seeing. They did not. Not a single one. The whole time I was taking pictures, he was drifting closer. Not swimming, just light tail flicks. I couldn't tell if he thought I was something else or if he thought I was going to feed him. I put the camera in my dive pouch, a little mesh bag that attaches to your belt that I used mostly for trash I found on the reef, and decided to see if he'd let me pet him. I almost did. I got stupid close, but the way he looked at my hand told me it wasn't the best idea. I wish I had. Then I'd either have a perfect ending to the story or at least a cool scar. It was awesome. I really want to get back one day. I haven't been back to the sea since then. It's been too long. Hope you like the story. I never got to tell it before. Thanks for reading. Story 20. I was alone in my house at night, and at about 3 a.m. I woke up to something moving and making noise downstairs. I called 911 immediately. Once they arrived, they said the door was locked and asked if I was sure someone was inside. I insisted, and at my request, they broke down the door. A short scuffle arose before a police officer knocked on my door and told me to come out. I did, and he told me I should leave my house for the rest of the night and that I didn't need to see what was in the kitchen. I insisted again, and then I saw the entire room was coated in plastic. The man had several saws, knives, rope, bags, and sleeping pills. He was planning to harm me. Apparently, he was a man who was wanted for 2 crimes, so that was nice. Story 21. I didn't experience this, but my family did because of me. We had a trip to the mountains with a bunch of family to enjoy the snow. I was just a kid, and I'd wandered away up the hill with a walking stick. I broke my stick by stabbing it into the ground and just kicked around in the snow. I got bored and followed my own footsteps back down the hill, went to the car, and took a nap. My sister noticed I was nowhere to be seen, and my family went looking for me. They followed the trail I left and found my broken stick in the play area. They probably freaked out, thinking I got caught in a mini avalanche or fell into a small hole and dug in the snow looking for me. I honestly don't remember if I got in trouble, but I do remember that they were more relieved that I was okay. Story 22. This is an unconventional point of view, but one winter afternoon I attended a workshop where we made simple bows. The workshop took place in a town about a half an hour's train ride away. When it ended, I traveled back to my hometown. It was winter, so I was literally covered up from head to toe with a hat, scarf, coat, gloves, etc., and they were all coincidentally black. I also had an unstrung bow in my hand, which basically just looked like a stick. It was also pretty dark when the train arrived in my hometown, despite not really being late. I typically walk a bit faster than most people by default. As I was walking along the road from the station, I saw a woman with a small child about pelvis height, walking beside her and holding her hand. They were a good distance ahead of me, but since they were going the same way as me, as I was walking faster than them, I slowly but steadily gained on them. The little kid occasionally looked back and looked back more often as I got fairly close to them, maybe 10 meters behind them. At this point, the kid just started running forward, pulling his mom to go faster for a bit as they gained some distance again, then slowed down to the regular speed, which was still slower than my walking speed. The station itself is about half a kilometer away from the main area of the town, as you need to go over a road bridge to get there. Anyway, the situation with the kid looking back repeatedly and pulling his mom forward with full childish force to escape the pursuer, who was just walking home, went on for maybe 300 of those 500 meters. I would start catching up. The kid would pull his mom forward, so she'd jog for a bit, then they'd continue walking as I continued to catch up, and it just kept happening. Since there's only one main road there, there's nowhere else to go to take a different path until you cross the long bridge. So I guess I coincidentally became the main antagonist in that kid's personal horror movie that night. Story 23. I was heading home from a casino out in the country when I heard something ticking in my tire, and I thought maybe I'd picked up a nail. I pulled on to the next exit, which quickly ended on a dirt road. I ended up in front of an abandoned schoolhouse, and what's more, a deep harvest moon was up, giving an eerie feeling everywhere. I was already uneasy when I got to check the wheel, and then I heard something heavy moving around the building. Instincts kicked in, screaming, heck no, I've seen this movie. I jumped in my car and punched it backward onto the road. I'd have driven on my rims if I had to be anywhere but there. Fortunately, it was just a pebble in my treads, but I wasn't about to chance it with whatever was out there. Story 24. My girlfriend said she had been having things happen that seemed like a ghost. We're both pretty scientific and skeptical of this kind of stuff, but after she said her TVs would turn on, I finally witnessed a bunch of lights turning on and off. I mostly shrugged it off since it's an old house, whatever. I went home and made a protein shake. I shook it, and on the count of 3, my lights turned off like a switch. Except it's impossible to switch those lights off as they are the kind that strictly and slowly fade in and out. The light turned on when I hit them, and then my TV started turning off by itself. None of this had ever happened before. Story 25. I was in my cabin, which is a half mile from any neighbors on the lake. I'd been splitting wood in the afternoon and left the axe in the stump. Later that evening, a lightning storm appeared on the horizon. There was no rain and it was totally silent, but there were tons of lightning flashes. My wife and I were sitting in the dark watching it because it was cool. She turned to me and said she was getting a little freaked out. I was too, so we turned on the lights. They were on for maybe 5 seconds and then the power went out. We got really freaked out. I quickly locked all the doors. We started getting ready for bed and calmed down. When we went into the bedroom, which looks out over the woodpile, the lightning strike perfectly framed the axe and the stump in the window. We spent the next however long watching every lightning flash to make sure the axe was still there, freaking ourselves out every time that it would be gone, just like in a movie. Story 26. 25 years ago, my ex-husband and I were traveling from Nevada to West Virginia by car. In Arkansas, we drove through a little town called Brinkby. It was late spring, warm and still light outside. We were hungry and tired and decided to get some dinner and stop for the night. Brinkby initially seemed like a charming little town. We went through the local McDonald's, and that's when things started getting weird for us. While we were ordering, we heard what sounded like a gunshot followed by a woman screaming. I know we heard it because we both looked at each other and said, "What the heck?" at the same time. Then we looked at the 50-ish woman taking our order, didn't bat an eye, and had absolutely no expression on her face. When my husband asked if she had heard that, the only thing she said was, "Would there be anything else?" No, thank you. After we paid for our food, we drove down this nice tree-lined main street. It wasn't well off, but it was definitely well kept. There were no fancy cars, but no rust buckets and no people. At that time of year, kids should have been out playing, riding bikes, etc. People should have been walking that lovely street. Nothing. No animals, no birds, no other cars on the road. No sounds, just nothing. Except for a strong feeling of being watched. We grew more and more uneasy. Finally found an old motel with a vacancy sign lit up and lights on inside. There were no cars in the parking lot. Still, no one to be seen, no movement inside. My ex and I sat in the car for a minute just looking at this place. At the exact time, we turned to each other and said, "Heck no." I was certain that if we stayed the night there, we'd be staying there permanently. There was just this palpable feeling of evil and fear that I'd never experienced before, nor have I felt since. I'm not one to always be tuned into the atmosphere around me, kind of live in my own little bubble, so this was really intense for me. As we drove away, we both felt the dread physically lift from the car. If it had just been me, I would have chalked it up to silliness, but my ex was in the military, and honestly, not much rattled him, especially very intangible things like this. We simply knew we were in danger. He told me later that it felt like we were characters in a horror movie who made it out alive, limping down the road and holding each other up for support. Despite being exhausted, we purposely drove another 2 hours before stopping for the night, just to be as far away from that place as we could. Screw Brinkby, Arkansas. Story 27. When I was 16, I did a 1-year high school exchange program in Japan. When I arrived, it turned out my host family was in a Christian sect. They informed me that they had decided to host me because I came from a Christian country. I come from a progressive European country that is certainly not very religious. They used me as their housekeeper. I had to get up at 5 a.m. to do laundry, etc. My host mom was decidedly not mentally well. Once, she screamed at me for an hour for putting a towel too close to the toilet in the cupboard for towels, mind you. She also hit her 6-year-old daughter and berated her for not being good enough in school. The kid was dyslexic. Stay became more and more terrifying. My host mom kicked her daughter out of her own bedroom for me to stay in because I was smarter than the 6-year-old. My clothes were taken away and I was forced to wear Christian clothes. Preppy skirts, light colors. I was not allowed to brush my hair within view of anyone because the act was dirty. My host mom was a friend of my contact in the exchange organization, and my calls were under surveillance from my host mom, so I couldn't reach out to anyone. When I did, I was told I was lying. Since my host sister was being mistreated, she was not doing well. I tried to be kind to the girl, and I think she felt very safe around me. One day, I'd taken her home from school. My host mom was still at work. The little girl just lost it for some reason. Started screaming, crying, and hitting me. It was intense. I was 16 and had no idea what to do. She was acting like an injured animal. After a while of this, I went into the bedroom and closed the door because she was being so aggressive toward me. I heard a commotion in the kitchen and got worried she hadn't calmed down, but rather was trying to put on the gas stove or something dangerous that could hurt her. I opened the door and looked out down the hallway. What I saw was straight out of a horror movie. This little Japanese girl was running toward me in her Catholic schoolgirl uniform, holding a huge knife and screaming at the top of her lungs. I bolted, shoeless, out of the apartment. Sakura was running after me with a knife. The elevator doors barely managed to close as she was stabbing the doors with a knife. Most of all, I remember her eyes. They were completely wide, black, and blank. It was like she was in a different world. I spent several hours sitting in the lobby, crying until my host mom got home. What happened afterward was completely surreal. I refused to go back into the apartment. After hours of arguing, the contact person in the exchange organization was finally called. I demanded to be put somewhere else right now. The lady finally complied, and I was convinced to go back into the apartment to wait for her to pick me up. My host mom hid and screamed at her daughter, then she instructed me to sit on a kitchen chair in the middle of the living room. I was not allowed to move, and the host mom got down on the floor and rolled around screaming and crying for me and God to forgive her. This went on for hours. She was completely psychotic and I was scared out of my freaking mind. I got picked up and placed in a different host home. The 3 months I lived with this Christian family were never spoken of again. Story 28. I was in the Czech Republic for work and hopped in the bus to the hotel, except it was headed in the wrong direction. It immediately got on the freeway. No cell service and no Google Maps. We were probably 25 kilometers out in the middle of nowhere with no gas stations or anything. I saw a train station that looked like it was from World War II, so I hopped off. These little kids, about 10 years old, were standing outside smoking cigarettes and eyeing me. I went in and repeated the name of the city to the ticket guy, and he pointed to the exit. I got outside, and there were 3 trains. It was getting dark, and I started asking everyone if they spoke English. I finally found a chain-smoking pregnant woman who told me the train I needed. I came to find out it was the last train back for the night. I made it back, but wow. Story 29. About 15 of us were staying at a friend's rundown lake house, but we expected a few more people. It was 4th of July weekend, so we shot some fireworks, drank about 30 beers apiece, and got as hell before heading to bed around 2 a.m. About 30 minutes into us trying to pass out, a car rolled up slowly without its lights on, and no one recognized it. We were all paranoid as we watched 5 guys in masks pile out of the sedan and head toward the rotted front door. Then they knocked. There were like 8 guys in that tiny house at that point, and not a single one volunteered to answer. So myself and another guy were nominated. We heard them softly call out the name of the guy who owned the place, which was just the worst. Eventually, we opened the door and saw them, all wearing cardboard John Malkovich masks, and asked what the heck they wanted. They pulled them off and turned out to be the guys we were expecting earlier. They'd gotten lost and decided, since they happened to have the masks, that they would mess with us. Being John Malkovich had come out about a week earlier, and the masks were a theater giveaway. It worked. We ended up staying up a bit later with him, laughing about it. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.